Warrior Lore. Chapter 2670. Shut up. Li Zongbao raised the immortal piercing whip in his hand and shouted, "We are all Dao sect cultivators. Even if we fall into the sword array of a sword cultivator, we must remain calm. How can you make such a big fuss?" Senior brother Li. Hearing Li Zongbao shout, everyone turned around. Seeing that it was Li Zongbao who had killed Qin Jian, they were all overjoyed. "All of you, don't panic. Just focus on defending the formation. Even if there is a sword array, there will be a golden core stage elder to break it." Li Zongbao said calmly, "The yin-yang sword array was already so powerful and all of you managed to escape unscathed. Even if there is a sword array, what can it do to us? Now that all of you are in such a mess, even if the elders break the array, all of you will not be able to escape." That's right. Senior brother Li is right. Some of the Foundation establishment stage elders heard and shouted, urging the scattered cultivators to get back into formation. In fact, everyone understood the logic behind Li Zongbao's words. These late Foundation establishment old men could also say it, but unfortunately, not many people would listen. Now that Li Zongbao was standing there like a white jade pillar supporting the heavens, his words were even more effective than the words of 100 late Foundation establishment old men. That steady aura slowly spread out, and the tremors in the distance were no longer as frightening as before. All of you advance in an orderly manner. If you encounter a sword cultivator's attack, you can use the array to attack. Do not try to be a hero and face the sword chi alone. Li Zongbao reminded again, "I will follow the golden core stage elders to the edge of the array and see if we can find any loopholes." Thank you, Senior Brother Li, for breaking the array. All the cultivators, regardless of which sect they were from, shouted, "All of you protect yourselves well." Li Zongbao nodded slightly and gave Mingyu a look. The two of them increased their speed again. Mingyu saw that Li Zongbao was commanding the troops well and calmly, and was able to stabilize the morale of the troops better than a golden core cultivator like herself. She could not help but feel happy for Fairy Hongxia. However, in Mingyu's eyes, Fairy Hongxia's performance was not as she had imagined. As Mingyu and the others flew, they encountered more and more disciples. Most of these disciples stopped respectfully in mid-air. However, there were still some disciples who glanced at the three of them without any expression on their faces. It was as if in this critical moment, they could only rely on themselves. What golden core? What masters? They were all useless. Mingyu and the rest did not mind. In the face of danger, everyone's life were their own lives. Even if a nascent soul cultivator could not protect a low-level disciple, why should they be so respectful? Xiangming and the others were indeed flying very fast. At this moment, they had already reached the edge of the yin-yang sword formation. There were tens of thousands of cultivators directly facing the edge of the yin-yang sword formation. Their attacks covered an area of several hundred meters, and the intensity of their attacks was also extremely dense. Unfortunately, the yin-yang sword array was formed by hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators and yin-yang swords. LV Ruochong had already considered the methods that the Dao sect cultivators would use to break the array. The array formed by tens of thousands of cultivators was very simple. How could it break the sword array? Before Hongting arrived and Xiangming and the others destroyed the array core, the attacks of the tens of thousands of cultivators were like scratching an itch. They were completely useless. There were even a few times when the green and red swords rampaged about without restraint. Many mid- and late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators were unable to dodge in time and were slain by the swords. Although some of the late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators had been killed, the group of cultivators facing the swordlight had no way of retreating. They could only brace themselves and step over the corpses of their fellow sect members to fight. As a result, the number of high-level Foundation establishment disciples who died here was actually much higher than the number inside the formation. Sigh. Xiangming sighed and glanced at Desun and Stonghua. Both of them looked terrible as well. Desun waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Hongming and the others are already far away. Let's hurry over." If nothing happens, Desun had only just spoken when another rumbling sound came from a few kilometers away. This sound was like the beating of a drum, but it was also like a tsunami. Shortly after, the ground shook once more, and an indescribable clamor arose in everyone's hearts. Xiong Huasong narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. He said coldly, "LV Ruochong, she is indeed my enemy. Besides the yin-yang sword array, there are other sword arrays. Let's go. I'd like to see how many disciples this sword cultivator has to be able to set up such a huge array." Dasun raised his eyebrows and said in high spirits. His previous depression had long disappeared. Xiangming also came to a realization. He turned to look at the golden core cultivators around him and the tens of thousands of Foundation establishment disciples flying around him. He laughed and said, "That's right. 10 times the amount. LV Ruochong actually set up 2 layers of sword arrays. How many disciples can she have? This second array, I'm afraid it's a bit of a bluff." Sure enough, when everyone listened carefully, although the vibrations and sounds seemed to be coming from all directions, if one were to carefully observe, they would be able to tell that most of the sounds were coming from the west. The sounds from the east, north, and south were much smaller. In fact, the sounds were spreading in 3 directions. "Ha ha, little brat from the Tao sect, I've been waiting for you here for a long time." A thunderous voice came from the sky in the distance. At the same time, a figure like an iron tower loomed in the sky. It was unknown if this person's cultivation was high or if it was the effect of the sword array, but the impression that this person gave off was extremely tall and mighty. "Humph, ignorant sword cultivator." Not far from that person, a cold voice sounded. Then, a golden light flew out from the source of the voice. A slender rope about 10 feet long flew into the sky and rushed towards that person like a dragon. "This is fellow Taoist Lu Xinwu's spirit-binding chains." Xiangming was very familiar with Lu Xinwu from the Shanghua sect. Once he saw the golden light from the magic treasure, he hurriedly said. While everyone was moving, they looked at the sky anxiously to see how that swordsman would deal with it. But they saw that the spirit-binding chains seemed to have a mind of their own. They flew against the wind and in the blink of an eye, flew in front of that tall swordsman. "Ayaya!" That swordsman cried out in surprise. His blurry figure was revealed. It was a burly man whose body was pitch black from head to toe like charcoal. Following the swordsman's cry of surprise, his body actually staggered, as if he had stepped on something slippery. He was unable to dodge in time, and the spirit-binding chains immediately wrapped around his body. Ha ha ha! Seeing this, a few young disciples in the initial stage of Foundation establishment could not help but laugh. One of them even said, "Such a clumsy swordsman." However, before this disciple could finish his sentence, he saw that the swordsman's body flashed with an intense black sword light. The sword light also destroyed the spirit-binding chains in an instant. At the same time, the black sword light flashed and spun rapidly around the swordsman's body. Not good. Seeing this, Lu Xinwu knew that he had fallen into the swordsman's trap. At the same time, he knew that things were not going well and hurriedly formed a spell to retract the spirit-binding chains. However, the swordsman's body seemed to have an indescribable suction force. No matter how Lu Xinwu channeled his magic power, the spirit-binding chains could not break free from the black sword light's binding. Boom! A loud sound rang out. The black sword light around the swordsman's body suddenly expanded, like the black quills of a hedgehog. Lu Xinwu immediately lost his connection with the spirit-binding chains. Pa pa pa! A series of crisp sounds rang out. Although the sound was not loud, it was very clear in the sky. A few rays of golden light flew out from the black sword light. The golden light flickered slightly and gradually disappeared. Looking at Lu Xinwu again, his face showed a trace of redness. His eyes were filled with regret as he looked at the spirit-binding chains that had been cut into several pieces. Ha ha ha, the Tao sect's methods are only as a LV Jianyu, you're overthinking. The pitch-black swordsman raised his head and laughed. If it were up to me, why would we need to set up a formation in this sword catacomb? We could just directly kill our way into the 3 kingdoms of cultivation. Second brother. At this moment, a voice rang out not far from the dark-skinned man. Then, a green sword light flashed, and an extremely thin swordsman, who was like a bamboo pole, appeared. He was dressed in a green sword robe. LV Jianyo's great wisdom is not something you can measure. You've only defeated a mid-golden core cultivator. How can you be so arrogant? Don't embarrass the Three Swords sect. Yes, I know my mistake. Although the pitch-black man lowered his head in fear, it was obvious that he did not care. He even arrogantly winked at the group of golden core cultivators. Hiss, Hung Zhao and the rest were frightened by the green and red sword light. When they saw the swordsman's green sword robe, they could not help but gasp. I am Qing Jian of the Three Swords sect. The tall and thin swordsman lowered his head slightly and looked at Hung Zhao and the rest. His face was expressionless, like a block of wood. I am Bai Tianming of the Three Swords sect. The pitch-black man shouted loudly. His voice was much louder than Qing Jian's. I am Bai Shun of the Three Swords sect. Another voice rang out. It sounded soft, like a female swordsman. But when everyone looked to the left of Qing Jian, where the yellow and red sword light flashed, what appeared was a white and fat male swordsman with a bulging belly. However, this white fatty had a bulging forehead, thin eyebrows, small eyes, and white skin. He really did look like a female cultivator. Congratulations to my fellow Taoists of the Tao sect for breaking out of the yin-yang sword formation. Welcome to the 5 elemental swords formation. Qing Jian said calmly. His tone was filled with mockery. I have been waiting for you all for a long time, but I did not expect you to only break the yin-yang sword formation now. The yin-yang sword formation was set up by the Kuan sword sect and the Taihe sword sect together. You all actually spent so much time. Yes, you even lost so many disciples. This is really beyond my expectations. -11. Chapter 2671. It's just a bullshit yin-yang sword formation. It's as easy as blowing off dust for us. Hearing Qing Jian's ridicule, Hung Tong couldn't help but get angry. Your 5-element sword formation is just a copy of my Tao sect's 5-element sword formation. What's there to be proud of? Is that so? Bai Tianming laughed and waved his hand. A pitch-black sword light flew out as he shouted, Come, come, come. I'll fight you one-on-one. Second brother. Without waiting for Hung Tang to reply, Qing Jian berated, the Tao sect's brats don't know any better. Why are you following suit? The one who set up the formation, fellow sword Xiao, hasn't even reported his name. How can you start fighting? Hearing this, Hung Tang's nose almost became crooked from anger. Haha, that's right. We haven't even met with the Tao sect's cultivators. How can this formation be activated? About 300 meters away from Qing Jian and the others, there was another flash of white sword light. A sword cultivator wearing a white sword robe appeared, and beside him was a female swordsman wearing an aqua-blue sword robe. I'm Xiao Jinding of the Sword Cauldron Sword Sect. Greetings to everyone from the Tao sect. There were some flaws in the sword formation just now, so I want to check it out. Please forgive me for not welcoming you. As he spoke, the swordsman named Xiao Jinding actually cupped his hands and bowed politely. I'm Luo Shueilon of the Flowing Water Sword Manor. Although the female swordsman was smiling like a flower, with blue sword light flashing around her body, she didn't speak much. She only spoke one sentence before stopping. Cut the crap, Lu Xinwu said coldly. Let me see what kind of trash your 5-element sword formation is. This is Lu Xinwu of the Splendid Flower Sect. Xiao Jinding's face revealed a trace of astonishment. Your Splendid Flower Sect is one of the top sects in the country of Xi. Why are you so lacking in etiquette? Who said that the 5-element sword formation was set up by only 5 sword sects? We waited patiently here and didn't try to kill you. You call yourself the Orthodox Taoist, but you don't have the patience to wait for the masters of the sword formation to appear? Lu Xinwu's nose was even more crooked than Hung Tung's. Fellow Taoist Lu, don't be anxious, don't be confused, calm your heart. Yuan Zhengyu of the Kunlun sect hurriedly shouted, This is the swordsman's trick to confuse us. He wants us to fall into his trap. We'll just wait for them to put on a show. That's right. Lu Xinwu's heart skipped a beat. He nodded at Yuan Zhengyu and said, Thank you for your reminder. I am a little impatient. Tell the disciples. Hung Li sent a voice transmission in a low voice. Set up an attack formation and charge to the west at any time. This old man is Qi Shanming Fan. In midair, there was an inexplicable fluctuation. Suddenly, a short and fat old man appeared. This old man looked very old. His hair and beard were snow white, and the top of his head was shiny. There was only a circle of hair around his head, which looked similar to a circle of beard. Looking at the old man's face again, he was very plain, no different from an ordinary farmer in the secular world. However, it was very similar to his name, Ordinary. This old man is Liao Ke of the Seven Spiritual Mountains. A high-pitched chirp of a bird resounded in the sky. A five-colored light flew over from afar and entered everyone's field of vision in the blink of an eye. However, the light stopped about 1,000 feet away from everyone. Each of them was tall and skinny. Their eyes were slender and long. Their eyebrows were slanted to their temples. Their thin lips were slightly trembling under their tall noses. Their voices shook the surroundings. This swordsman looks a little similar to Xiao Hua. Li Zongbao and the rest flew closer and could see clearly. Li Zongbao could not help but feel surprised. He could not help but look at Fairy Hongxia. Even Fairy Hongxia was slightly stunned. However, she immediately frowned. Although this person was not Xiao Hua, there were some similarities between his eyebrows, especially that pair of phoenix eyes. However, this Liao Ke's eyes were full of arrogance. They were far from Xiao Hua's calm and amiable eyes. It could only be said that they were similar, and could not be said to be similar. Good heavens, seeing the appearance of the seven swordsmen, Hung Feng and the rest could not help but feel a chill in their hearts. The previous yin-yang sword formation only had 4 second-grade illusory swordsmen. Now, there were actually 7 of them in the 5-element sword formation. This meant that the 5-element sword formation was even more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. The yin-yang sword formation had killed more than half of the Dao Sect's Foundation Establishment middle stage cultivators and more than half of the Qi refinement stage cultivators. What about the 5-element sword formation? Xiong Huasong, Liao Ke said coldly, I heard that you are an expert in Black Sky Sect's formations. The 10 Directions Annihilation formation that LVGNU was trapped in was your work. To tell you the truth, this 5-element sword formation is really much more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. The heavens are virtuous, and I do not wish for too many cultivators to be buried here. If you know what's good for you, all of you should surrender. When my sword domain's sword transformation senior and your Dao Sect's nascent soul masters arrive, all of you will be able to return safely to the 3 cultivation countries. Although your reputation will be damaged, it is still 100 times better than dying here, right? Liao Ke's words were even more powerful than the yin-yang sword formation. In an instant, he had broken the bottom line of many low-level foundation establishment and Qi refinement stage cultivators. That's right, we will fight to the end. Although we will die, but who will remember us? Rather than that, why not surrender and return to our homeland after the war? Although our reputation is a little bad, we can still look forward to the great Tao. It is still better than cutting off our cultivation path. All right. Many cultivators were muttering like this. Ha ha, Hung Feng flew a few feet forward and laughed loudly. You sword cultivators do not cultivate and do not know the power of the heavenly Tao. You are just making a fool of yourselves here. Not to mention that Tao cultivators are natural enemies. Will the cultivators who surrender be able to wait until the end of the war? Even if the cultivators who surrender are able to return to their sects alive, their Tao heart will be damaged and they will have inner demons on their cultivation path. How can they improve when the Tao is 1 foot tall and the devil is 10 feet tall? How can they improve? Rather than having inner demons in their hearts and not being able to cultivate the great Tao, why not be magnanimous and walk the path of killing sword cultivators to the end? If they die and their names go down in history. If they live, they can wash away their worries and their cultivation will improve by leaps and bounds. Are there no records of this in the records of the various sects? After the war, who knows how many cultivators have their realms and cultivations improved greatly? How can we Tao sect cultivators be short-sighted people like you who do not wait for the heavenly Tao? When Hung Feng said this, many cultivators felt a chill in their hearts. It was as if they had been enlightened. and many cultivators' foreheads were even covered in sweat. Liao Kei's words were not wrong, but he was a sword cultivator after all. How would he know about the Dao sect's cultivation? Hung Feng's words were even more correct. Unless the cultivator did not want to cultivate anymore and only wanted to escape with his life, then he should surrender. Otherwise, the inner demons would exist in his cultivation for the rest of his life. If he did not have a great opportunity, it would be extremely difficult to get rid of them. And such a great opportunity would probably be even more difficult than surviving the war of Dao cultivators. However, those who were enlightened naturally had the ability to comprehend. Those who did not could only sneer in their hearts and take Hung Feng's words as a form of encouragement. Haha, what heavenly Dao! What great Dao! Bai Shun laughed loudly. He actually formed an orchid shape with his fingers and pointed at Hung Feng. Now that there is no life, there is only the Dao of life and death. There was actually a kind of charm in the plump, fair man's eyes. It was even more beautiful than Luo Shuilan's. Let's go. Hung Feng could not be bothered to say anything else. He waved his hand and secretly transmitted his voice. Instantly, the group of late Foundation establishment stage disciples around Hung, as well as a dozen early Oris core stage cultivators, all moved and flew towards the west. Hung Feng and the rest had already broken through the boundary of the yin-yang sword formation. However, they did not see the disciples outside the formation. Naturally, they knew that they had already died at the hands of Dao cultivators. They had long been anxious to leave this place. Now that they had received Hung Feng's orders, they all activated their dermic powers and wanted to rush out of the 5 elements sword formation that had yet to be activated. Ha ha ha, I heard that Dao cultivators are all knowledgeable people. Previously, they did not wait for their masters to arrive before speaking. Now, they want to leave without even waiting for their masters to speak. Really? I don't know what to say. Xiao Jinding covered his mouth and laughed. He looked very refined and was not worried about the cultivators escaping far. They are in a hurry to die. Qing Jian said coldly. Big brother, Bai Tianming was about to say something when suddenly, Hung Feng, Yuan Zhongyu, and the rest moved at the same time. They clapped their hands together, and the talismans that they had flaunted earlier appeared once again. Several brilliant rays of light flashed and countless powerful hurricanes were born. Combined, Qing Jin shouted when he saw this. Green sword light flashed around his body, and a sprout-like sprout was born from his sword light. As the sword light flashed, the sprout-like sprout grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a towering tree. Moreover, the tree did not stop growing. It grew bigger and taller again. Wong! A sword hum could be heard coming from the tree. The entire tree had turned into an incomparably huge sword. When Qing Jin turned into a sword, the other 4 Dao cultivators did not stop. Bai Tianming let out a roar. A pitch-black sword light rushed out and surrounded his iron tower-like body. Gradually, his body transformed into an iron tower. Moreover, this iron tower was in a quadrangular shape. The scattered sword qi condensed into strands of dust that resembled smoke. Bai Shun softly and bashfully, like a mortal girl undressing. She covered her face with her hands, and the yellow-green sword light on her hands continued to shoot out, completely covering her. With a loud bang, the sword light turned into sparks. A pillar-like huge sword surrounded by flames appeared in the air. A look of disdain appeared in Xiao Jinding's eyes. It was as if he despised Hung Ming and the others for not declaring war. However, he did not hesitate. He crossed his hands, and a silver-white brilliance appeared in his hands. As he rubbed it on his arm, the silver-white brilliance overflowed and enveloped his entire body. -11. Chapter 2672. Bang! The sound of a golden drum rang out, and Xiao Jinding's body gradually disappeared. A long sword that resembled a spear appeared in the air. The only woman among the 7 swordsmen was Luo Shuilan. Her movements were the smallest. She waved her hand, and a blue sword light rose up like a ladle and sprinkled on top of her head. Hua! The sound of water gushing out was like a fountain. Countless sword lights rushed out from the source of the sound and flew straight up to a height of several feet. Along with the flickering of these sword lights, Luo Shuailon's figure also disappeared. The sword lights were like sparkling water droplets, shining with an extremely beautiful blue light. It was several times more beautiful than Luo Shuailon's. The moment the 5 giant swords appeared, they also absorbed the 5 elements' spiritual qi from 100 zhang radius like a whale swallowing water. The sharpness of the sword qi and the restrictive power of the sword lights were not much inferior to the yuanying hands of Hong Hong and the rest. Kill Liao Ke and Ordinary first. Xiong Huasong immediately reminded everyone when he saw that the 5 of them had all transformed into swords. Ha ha ha. Liao Ke sneered as a 5-colored brilliance flashed around his body. In an instant, Liao Ke's body slowly elongated amidst the brilliance and 5-colored feathers appeared on his head. Furthermore, a pair of wings that were several feet in size slowly extended from Liao Ke's ribs as the brilliance flashed. A multicolored peacock slowly revealed its figure. Wu, Liao Ke flapped his wings slightly. As the 5-colored light and the feathers on his wings trembled, the 5 elements' spiritual qi within 100 zhang radius became chaotic. The yuanying hands that were absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth stopped at the same time, and the light trembled. Not good. Hong Hong and the rest seemed to have a bad premonition. They seemed to know what this splitting-edge 5-element sword formation was. Attack. Yuan Zhongyu and the rest activated their spirit talismans, sending the power from their golden dawn into them. At the same time, they tried their best to take out their magical treasures, wanting to kill Liao Ke before the 5 giant swords could take action. They wanted to prevent the formation from activating. Everyone rushed towards Liao Ke, leaving Ordinary to the side. However, Ordinary was extremely ordinary. There was no light around him, nor was there any fluctuation. Not even a trace of sword light could be seen. Furthermore, the heaven and earth spiritual energy that was like a hurricane also disappeared when it hit Ordinary's body. All of a sudden, Ordinary disappeared. He had disappeared into the hurricane. His disappearance did not attract the attention of any cultivators. However, a few moments later, Ordinary reappeared 1,000 feet away from the group of cultivators. However, the current Ordinary was different from before. Ordinary's originally short stature became even shorter. His entire body slowly elongated. Under the rising sun, Ordinary actually transformed into a flat disc that was a few feet in size. This disc was a little strange. It looked like it was made of metal, but not metal. It looked like wood, but not wood. There was no light on it. It was early in the morning, and there were some pitter-patter of raindrops. However, when these raindrops fell on the disc, they did not stop. Instead, they penetrated it as if there was nothing there. Only when the warm sunlight shone on it did it emit some light. This light was not sword light, but more like fluorescent light. This fluorescent light spots looked like starlight. These starlight spots rotated mysteriously, and their color gradually deepened. Wang, the 5 giant swords seemed to let out a sword hum at the same time. They flew into the air and flew towards Liao Ke. Quick, stop them! Xiang Ming shouted without hesitation. The 5 flying swords flew extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they were in front of Liao Ke's 5-colored peacock. However, to Xiang Ming and Xiong Huasong's surprise, the 5 flying swords swept past Liao Ke's 5-colored peacock without stopping at all. We've been tricked. When Heng Zhao and the rest looked in the direction of the flying swords, they saw the disc that was a few feet in size in the air, slowly rotating under the sunlight. The 5 flying swords rushed to the bottom of the disc, and 5 sword qi rushed out. The flying swords directly covered the disc. Wang! The disc let out a huge rumbling sound, and as if it had eaten a large amount of spirit grass, it rapidly expanded. Whoosh! When the disc became a few dozen feet in size, the 5 flying swords rushed up and pierced the 5 edges of the disc. Pong! Just as the 5 flying swords came into contact with the disc, countless tiny sword flashes shot out from the disc. It was as if countless meteors were flying in all directions, trapping all the cultivators within the meteors. 5 planets disc? Xiong Huasong was the first to realize that something was amiss. He shouted in shock. This? How did it end up in Hung country? 5 planets disk? Is it the core of the legendary 5 planets reversal star array? When Heng Zhao and the rest heard this, they were also shocked. The so-called 5 planets reversal array was a legendary ancient killing array. It had long been lost on the Dawn Rain continent. The cultivators of the Dao sect had only grown up listening to stories of how this array had killed powerful cultivators. How could they not be shocked when they heard that the Dharma artifact that had fused with Ordinary's body was the core of this array? If I'm not wrong, it should be this. Xiong Huasong naturally knew more about array formations than Heng Zhao and the rest. He had some impression of something that had long been annihilated, but he didn't dare to be sure. This guy is the key to this 5-element splitting blade array. At this point, even if Xiang Ming didn't say it, who wouldn't know? The few golden core cultivators immediately abandoned Liao Ke and used their half-formed nascent soul hands to attack the 5 planets disk. Wong, 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 wong. The humming of the swords grew louder and louder. The entire 5 elements disk began to rotate violently, and the 5 huge flying swords also began to rotate. As the 5 elements planetary disk rotated, more and more meteors shot out from it, almost covering the entire 5 elements planetary disk. The meteor emitted an extremely dazzling sword light, and the whistling sword energy pierced through the air. It simply charged aimlessly towards the entire 5 elements sword formation. Heng Zhao and the rest's nascent soul hands approached Ordinary with great difficulty. The closer they got, the more sword light shot out. Furthermore, the astrolabe and the 5 flying swords had almost merged into one, forming a colorless ball of light. The powerful sealing force of the several nascent soul stage cultivators did not seem to have any effect on the ball of light. In fact, the omnipresent sword chi was constantly neutralizing the nascent soul stage cultivators' hands and preventing them from getting closer. Heng Zhao and the rest's expressions changed slightly. This was the hand of a nascent soul. The reason why they dared to face a third-grade illusory swordsman was because they knew that the hand of a nascent soul could destroy an illusory sword and was their guarantee of survival. But now, there were only 6 second-grade illusory swordsmen, and they were actually able to resist the hands of several nascent soul cultivators. How were they going to fight back? At this moment, a shocking bird cry rang out. Liao Ke, who had been ignored by everyone, suddenly flapped his wings again, and the 5-colored light shot into the sky. Woo, below everyone. The ground that had suddenly stopped trembled again, and cracks appeared like when the yin-yang sword array was activated. Oh no! Hundreds of thousands of cultivators were lucky survivors of the yin-yang sword array. How could they not know how powerful it was? They hurriedly stabilized their bodies and activated the simple array, preparing to receive the attack of the sword array. Unexpectedly, from the cracks on the ground, the 5-colored sword light shot out. These sword lights did not attack the cultivators, but instead, they shot straight into the sky. Even the sword lights below the cultivators did not directly attack them. Before the crowd of cultivators could react, the tens of thousands of sword lights collided with the meteors shot out by the 5-colored ball of light high up in the sky. Crackle! The sound of frying beans filled the entire sword array, and it did not stop. An unbelievable scene appeared in front of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators. All the sword lights exploded with the sound, turning into countless fragments of light. The fragments of light floated in the air, sparkling and translucent. Moreover, each of the light spots had a different color. There were red, silver, black, blue, and even green. They complemented each other beautifully, making for an incomparably dazzling sight. Seeing how beautiful the 5-element sword array was, all the cultivators were puzzled. Oh no, it's the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Just as everyone was stunned for a moment, someone immediately sensed that something was wrong. Although the scene was so beautiful, the sparkling fragments of light were absorbing different types of heaven and earth spirit chi. Wherever the fragments of light covered, the heaven and earth spirit chi would be completely absorbed by the fragments of light, leaving not even a trace behind. Even near the nascent soul's hand, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was nowhere to be seen. Although the nascent soul's hand was powerful, it was few in number. How could it compare to the omnipresent fluorescent light? Not good. Xiong Huasong and the rest finally understood the power of the five elements sword array. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth within the array was absorbed by the sword lights. Even if there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the Tao sect, where could they absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? How could they fight against sword cultivators? After understanding the mystery behind this, Hong Ju and the others' backs were drenched in sweat. They were all shocked by LV Ruochang's calculations. Of course, the yin-yang sword array could kill Qi refinement stage cultivators, and the five-element sword array could kill foundation establishment stage cultivators. Then, what would happen after the five-element sword array? It would probably be a sword array that could kill golden core cultivators? Quick, kill this bastard! Hung Feng and Dai Sun shouted. The golden cores in their dantians were surging, and they did not dare to hold back their true essence. They did not care whether or not they could absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the sword array. They poured their dermic powers into the nascent soul's hand. Woo! The nascent soul's hand indeed let out a roar and flashed with brilliance. Several waves of restrictive power increased once again and enveloped the five-element sword array. How can it be so simple? Liao Kei's voice rang out. It was very arrogant. As Liao Kei flew, the five-element sword array flashed with brilliance. As it flapped with all its might, an extremely large amount of fluorescent light surged into the nascent soul's hand. Pa! The first sound came from somewhere, but it was no longer important. Following that, the sound of explosions rang out everywhere. -11. Chapter 2673. Right in front of Li Zongbao, several fluorescent lights suddenly exploded. From one of the fluorescent lights, a small sword about 3 inches long suddenly flew out, stabbing towards Li Zongbao's face at an even faster speed than the lightless shadow. The most frightening thing was that from the other fluorescent lights, small swords of various colors also flew out, stabbing towards Li Zongbao without any sign or direction. Not good. Although Li Zongbao had been on guard for a long time, when he saw such a strange situation, he was still somewhat unprepared. The immortal piercing whip in his hand was swung out without hesitation. Fortunately, Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip was usually in his hand and didn't need to be used. Unlike some of the nearby cultivators, who habitually took out their magic treasures and waited until the light of their magic treasures dimmed before suddenly realizing that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth inside the sword formation had long been absorbed by the fluorescent lights and was used to transform into flying swords. As the immortal piercing whip was swung, a string of whip shadows flew out, pa, protecting Li Zongbao's body and knocking away several flying swords. At this time, miserable screams were heard one after another from the nearby cultivators, all of whom were pitiful cultivators who couldn't defend themselves in time after taking out their magic treasures and being stabbed by the flying swords. These miserable screams were obviously more frequent than the yin-yang sword formation. The surviving qi refining cultivators were no longer lucky. Their flying yellow talismans, defensive yellow talismans, and magic treasures all relied on the spiritual qi of heaven and earth from the outside world. The true qi in their bodies was simply insufficient to support them. The sparkling sword lights had taken away all the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, cutting off their escape route. Moreover, although these flying swords looked very small, the sword qi inside them was extremely sharp. Even if the qi refining cultivators could block the first sword light, it would be difficult for them to dodge the second sword light. When the third and fourth sword light arrived without any warning, no ordinary qi refining cultivator could stand in mid-air. Since the aura refining cultivators were forced into such desperate straits, the early stage and mid-stage foundation establishment disciples weren't any better off either. Amidst this chaotic sword formation, they were only able to resist for a short moment. Once they let down their guard, a flying sword would appear out of nowhere and slash into their bodies. Li Zongbao was like this. He had just knocked away several flying swords and was about to raise his hand to block a flying sword that was slanting towards his neck. Suddenly, a sense of vigilance rose from under his feet. Almost without thinking, he quickly dodged. With a whoosh, a water blue sword light flew past his armpit. That powerful sword chi penetrated his body's defense, causing the brilliance around his body to flash continuously. Smack! Li Zongbao didn't even have time to take in a breath of cold air. He hastily swung his immortal piercing whip again, knocking away the flying sword that was still stabbing towards his back. However, right at this moment, another unexpected event occurred. The flying sword had just touched Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip when it exploded once more with a cracking sound. Over a dozen even smaller flying swords shot towards Li Zongbao from all directions. Not good. Li Zongbao hastily activated his true core strength. While his right hand waved the immortal piercing whip to block the flying swords, his left hand released a defensive magic art. Crack! Li Zongbao's defense had just taken shape when the round shield was destroyed by two flying swords. Although the nascent soul's hands had the power to restrain, under the impact of the flying swords, they gradually loosened. Even the talismans in the nascent soul's hands were attacked by the flying swords. Hung Zhao and the other golden core cultivators had a protective golden light around their bodies. When the flying swords hit them, they only flashed with golden light and could not really hurt their bodies. However, such an endless attack also consumed their dermic powers. Therefore, the golden core cultivators who were supporting the nascent soul hands could not free themselves to cast any spells to attack the five elements planetary disk. Of course, other than Hung Zhao and the other golden core cultivators who had spiritual talismans, there were many other golden core cultivators. These cultivators also took out their own dermic treasures and wanted to attack the five elements planetary disk. However, the flying swords were shooting out from the five elements planetary disk. The golden core cultivators could not get close to the five elements planetary disk and were immediately attacked by hundreds of flying swords. While the cultivators were protecting themselves, how could they really get close to the five elements planetary disk? What should we do now? Hung Zhao was a little anxious. He clearly knew that as long as they formed their nascent soul hands and restrained the five elements planetary disk, the five elements swords that were everywhere in the sword formation would disappear. However, the nascent soul hands could not do anything. It was not just spiritual talismans. Without the five elements spiritual qi, all the dermic spells and dermic treasures of the Dao sect were useless. It was not that Hung Zhao had not considered the possibility of the sword formation, blocking the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. However, sword cultivators also needed spiritual qi of heaven and earth. If sword cultivators did not use spiritual qi of heaven and earth, their flying swords were just decorations. However, Hung Zhao had never imagined that sword cultivators would use such a method of encroachment, using countless tiny flying swords to snatch spiritual qi of heaven and earth from other cultivators. This method, even if Hung Zhao racked his brains, he would not be able to think of it. It's this thing. Just as Hung Zhao was at a loss of what to do, a ray of blue light in the distance attracted his attention. His eyes lit up and he had an idea. Hung Zhao was looking in the direction of Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao's cultivation was indeed impressive. Although he could not use the spiritual qi of heaven and earth outside his body, he could not completely defend against the flying swords with just the true essence in his body and the immortal piercing whip. Finally, he was hit by a few flying swords. Fortunately, Li Zongbao had a protective dermic treasure, so the flying swords were easily blocked. However, he knew that this protective dermic treasure was his last line of defense. Without true essence replenishment, his bottom line would be lowered every time the flying swords hit him. Therefore, he waved the immortal piercing whip with all his might to block the flying swords. And the flying swords were like locusts, inexhaustible. In fact, the flying swords that he shattered could still transform into flying swords. Such an endless cycle would cause even a nascent soul cultivator to eventually run out of true essence, right? Just as he was in a predicament, a ray of blue light flashed by. Just as he looked up, he immediately felt his heart tremble. Li Zongbao knew that this was Fairy Hong Xia's connate primordial water. When he retracted his gaze, the thin layer of primordial water wrapped around him. At this moment, other than Fairy Hong Xia, Mingyu, Ji Mingxiu, and the rest were all within the primordial water. Many thanks, Li Zongbao said calmly. He had wanted to protect Fairy Hongxia on account of Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuaxia. Who would have thought that he would be protected by Fairy Hongxia again and again? Khanate primordial water. Li Zongbao immediately thought of the method Xiao Hua used to kill Qingjian. He thought to himself, this item must have been given to Fairy Hongxia by Xiao Hua. Fairy Hongxia's Xiantian primordial water was indeed effective. Although it was only a thin layer, all the tiny swords that dashed over could no longer maintain the shape of flying swords when they were not covered by the primordial water. Once again, they turned into tiny specks of light and disappeared into the primordial water. Khanate item. Impressive indeed. Li Zongbao sighed. Suddenly, his heart lit up. He hurriedly shouted, Junior Sister Hongxia, open up a small gap in the primordial water. Although Fairy Hongxia did not understand why, she still did it anyway. Master and disciple were truly of one heart. When Li Zongbao looked up at the invincible five-colored ball of light in the sky, Hong Heng's gaze also fell on it. Although Hong Hong did not say anything, his gaze met with Li Zongbao's. Li Zongbao understood his master's thoughts. He turned around and said, Junior Sister Hongxia, in this five-element splitting-edge sword formation, everything will be attacked by the five-element swords. Khanate items are an exception. Khanate primordial water, Khanate primordial fire, Khanate primordial wood, Khanate primordial gold, and Khanate primordial earth can all counter this sword formation. Among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, there are many who have such encounters. However, looking around us, we have yet to see such a person. Only Junior Sister has this Khanate primordial water. Therefore, to break this formation and save the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples, it all depends on Junior Sister. This, Fairy Hongxia, was slightly taken aback. She did not expect that the heavy responsibility of saving hundreds of thousands of Dao sect disciples would fall on her shoulders. Of course, Fairy Hongxia was also an outstanding person. She knew that this was a great opportunity. After thinking for a while, she nodded and said, I will follow Senior Brother Li's instructions. Good. Follow me. Li Zongbao was overjoyed. -11. Chapter 2674. Senior Brother Li, Ji Mingxiu said anxiously, the swordsmen who set up the array are all grade 2 illusory swords. Now that they have transformed into flying swords, how can Foundation establishment disciples like us withstand their attacks? Why don't Senior Sister Hongxia hand over the Khanate primordial water to the Golden Core Masters? Li Zongbao nodded and looked at Fairy Hongxia. That works too, as long as Junior Sister Hongxia is willing to part with it for the time being. Fairy Hongxia smiled bitterly. If the Khanate primordial water was in the Mist Tide Pearl, it would be fine no matter what. However, she had already sent the Mist Tide Pearl into her Ice Phoenix body. Even if she wanted to take it out, she could not. It's not that I'm unwilling. It's just that I can't take it out. I can only control it myself. Fairy Hongxia shook her head. All right, Hongxia, you can go now. I'll be responsible for the safety of Mingxiu and the rest for now. Mingyu took out her magic treasure Mingyu and said softly, Thank you, Martial Aunt Mingyu. Fairy Hongxia looked into the distance and said, There's a crimson-red glow over there and an azure-blue glow over there. It must be the Xiantian primordial fire and primordial water. If Martial Uncle has the time, you can head over and search for it. Thank you, Martial Aunt Mingyu. I'll immediately report to Master and send more Golden Core Masters to look for disciples who have Khanate primordial water to refine magic treasures. Li Zongbao said hurriedly, Let's go. Seeing Fairy Hongxia release a corner of the Khanate primordial water, Mingyu waved her hand and led the group away. After Mingyu and the rest flew away, Fairy Hongxia activated the Khanate primordial water to protect herself and Li Zongbao as she flew into the sky. How could the Golden Core Masters not know what Fairy Hongxia's Khanate primordial water meant? They were all overjoyed. Xiang Ming even shouted, Martial Niece Hongxia, you are the main contributor to breaking this array. Not only will my Rinsing Flower sect record your merit, even the dozens of sects in the 3 kingdoms will have to be grateful to you. Only Shtong Huasong frowned and shouted, Fellow Taoists, please hold off these annoying flying swords. I'll discuss this with my martial niece. Thank you for your trouble, fellow Taoist Xiong. Heng Zhao knew that he and the others were inferior to Xiong Huasong in terms of array formations, so he naturally activated his golden core again. His dermic powers surged out and supported the nascent soul hand once again. Even Liao Ke, who was flapping his wings to activate the 5-elemental firefly fragment, had a slight change in expression. Although the splitting-edge 5-elemental sword array had ordinary as the array core, with the azure sword and the other 5-elemental flying swords as support to activate the array, Liao Ke was also an extremely important figure. He was a mutated peacock bird cultivator and was adept at conjuring the 5-elemental spirit qi. Ordinary and company were the array core and had no time to fend for themselves, so Liao Ke was responsible for defending and protecting the array core. Although there were dozens of golden core cultivators among the Dao sect cultivators earlier, these golden core cultivators had been caught off guard and were unable to mobilize the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Hence, they had been suppressed and attacked by the 5-element broken fireflies. On the other hand, Liao Ke had relied on his unique peacock talent to control a large number of broken fireflies and was not at a disadvantage against dozens of golden core cultivators. This had caused his originally arrogant heart to become even more arrogant. At this moment, when Liao Ke saw Fairy Hong Xia's connate primordial water approaching, his heart skipped a beat. With a flap of his wings, thousands of broken fireflies rushed towards Fairy Hong Xia. There were so many of these broken fireflies, and they were so powerful that a beginner golden core cultivator who was standing between the two barely managed to hold on for a moment. Not daring to stay any longer, he hurriedly dodged and sent the wave-like broken fireflies towards the connate primordial water. Pa, 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 continuous sounds of explosions could be heard near the connate primordial water. Thousands of small swords were formed and charged towards the connate primordial water. Humph, I'd like to see. How many drops of your connate primordial water can you possibly have? Liao Ke saw the thousands of small swords falling into the connate primordial water and turning back into the 5-elemental spirit qi. He could sense that Fairy Hong Xia's connate primordial water was not completely suppressing the 5-element swords. The 5-elemental spirit qi that had turned back into connate primordial water was also disrupting it. In fact, it even clashed with the connate primordial water and turned it into nothingness. Liao Ke understood that as long as his 5-element broken fireflies were sufficient, Fairy Hong Xia's connate primordial water would be depleted sooner or later. Therefore, Liao Ke flapped his wings and diverted most of his energy to Fairy Hong Xia's side. Rinsing Flower Sect's Kai Hong Xia greets martial Uncle Shtong. Fairy Hong Xia controlled the connate primordial water to block Liao Ke's attack while looking at Shtong Huasong, who had flown below the connate primordial water. Shtong Huasong did not stand on ceremony and asked directly, "How many drops of connate primordial water do you have? Your cultivation is still weak. You can lend me some of your connate primordial water." "I'll let Martial Uncle Xiong know," Fairy Hong Xia said anxiously. "I have a lot of connate primordial water, but as for how many drops, I'm not sure." "Great." Xiong Huasong was worried that Fairy Hong Xia did not have much connate primordial water, which was why he was so worried. When he heard that Fairy Hong Xia did not know how many drops she had, he was overjoyed. "Quick, give it to me. I've refined the misty tide pearl that contains the connate primordial water together with the connate primordial blood dharma body. I'm unable to give it to Martial Uncle." Fairy Hong Xia did not dare to hide anything and replied hurriedly, "Ah? Refining a magic treasure together with the dharma body? How did you come up with such an unimaginable method?" Xiong Huasong was in disbelief. This is the first time I've heard of this." Li Zongbao, who was at the side, was silent. Naturally, he could not speak. It was just a sudden idea," Fairy Hong Xia said softly. "Oh well," Xiong Huasong knew that this was not the time to ask too many questions. He said hurriedly, "When you release the connate primordial water, will it be able to completely block off the 5-colored light?" Fairy Hong Xia knew what Xiong Huasong was referring to. She raised her head and looked at it. Biting her lips, she thought for a while and said, "I'll try my best." "Great." Xiong Huasong clapped his hands again and said, "Release the Dharma body and control the misty tide pearl to release the connate primordial water, blocking off the five-colored light. You'll have done a great service." "It's that simple?" Fairy Hong Xia could not believe it. "Of course it's that simple." Xiong Huasong smiled and said, "Once you block off the eye of the splitting-edge 5-elemental sword formation, those darn flying swords will not be able to be produced. Then, our talismans will be able to be used. With the talismans, their 5-elemental swords will be nothing. Do you understand?" "I understand." Fairy Hong Xia nodded hurriedly. Martial Uncle Xiong, Li Zongbao, who was at the side, narrowed his eyes and reminded, "Junior sister Hong Xia is only a foundation establishment middle-stage disciple. Even if she can control the connate primordial water, she can't possibly block off the 5-elemental swords disc all by herself, right? Why don't we find a few more disciples who have connate items to refine magic treasures? It won't be too late to do that." "How can a magic treasure refined by a connate item compare to a connate item?" Xiong Huasong waved his hand and said, "Besides, a connate item won't be of much use. If martial niece Hong Xia has a few drops of connate primordial water, we won't have to place our hopes on her." "But," Li Zongbao still shook his head, "Junior sister Hong Xia released the Dharma body. She will definitely be attacked by the 5-elemental swords. With us guarding by her side, what else can she do?" Xiong Huasong replied without hesitation. Li Zongbao originally wanted to say, "You guys are already in a sorry state. How can you care about others?" However, Xiong Huasong was after all a golden core master, and Li Zongbao did not dare to offend him. Then, Li Zongbao said again, "If junior sister Hong Xia covers up the eye of the formation, there are 6 grade 2 illusory swordsmen at the eye of the formation. Senior sister Hong Xia, martial niece Zongbao." Xiong Huasong said coldly, "This is an urgent matter. In the time that you have asked these few questions, thousands of disciples have already fallen in my sect. Even if martial niece Hong Xia is in danger of dying, which one do you think is more suitable to exchange her death for the lives of hundreds of thousands of disciples?" Li Zongbao was silent, and his eyebrows twitched slightly. "Junior will go." Fairy Hong Xia knew that Xiong Huasong's words were cruel and heartless. If she wanted to protect herself, she would definitely not risk her life. However, since she was already trapped in the sword formation, and since she had already joined the battle, she would encounter many things that were beyond her control. Hence, she would not be able to make a choice. "I will accompany you," Li Zongbao said helplessly. He also knew that this was probably the best choice. "Senior brother Li, you don't have to come over." Since Fairy Hong Xia had already made her decision, she said indifferently, "Junior sister is going to release the Dharma body. Under the primordial water, I cannot take care of others. Senior brother, it is better for you to leave this place." And Li Zongbao nodded and reminded, "Be careful. Junior sister knows." Fairy Hong Xia nodded. After hesitating for a moment, she said, "If anything happens to junior sister, you must inform him. Let him take revenge for me." "Don't worry. Definitely." Li Zongbao's words were concise, and he immediately escaped from the Xiantian primordial water. Xiong Huasong, who was standing by the side, was stunned. He saw Li Zongbao defending Fairy Hong Xia, and thought that Li Zongbao had feelings for her. Who knew that Fairy Hong Xia had left her last words for someone who was not Li Zongbao, and even wanted that person to take revenge for her? What was even stranger was that Li Zongbao actually agreed to it, as though he would definitely take revenge for Fairy Hong Xia. At that moment, Xiong Huasong's heart skipped a beat. That he couldn't be some nascent soul stage master? Even if it is a nascent soul stage master, so what? Xiong Huasong steeled his heart. Since things have come to this, even if a nascent soul stage master blames me, he can't do anything to me. Let's go. Xiong Huasong also flew out of the Xiantian primordial water. That half-nascent soul stage hand that was swaying in midair was still being attacked by many flying swords, and it was barely holding on. A phoenix cry resounded through the 9 heavens, and an ice phoenix celestial body flew out from Fairy Hong Xia's body. Above that misty green ice phoenix celestial body, strands of water-type heaven and earth spiritual chi condensed. Those slanted eyes of the ice phoenix celestial body flashed with a cold brilliance, and a domineering aura surged out from the ice phoenix celestial body. Seeing that the ice phoenix celestial body was released, the mutated peacock that Liao Ke had transformed into also raised its neck and cried out. The same cry shook the surroundings, as though it wanted to compete with the ice phoenix. Not only that, as Liao Ke's wings flapped, an endless hurricane was created, and waves after waves of 5 elemental swords flew towards the ice phoenix celestial body. -11. Chapter 2675. Fairy Hong Xia's ice phoenix celestial body had already been partially damaged by the yin-yang sword array. Now that the ice phoenix celestial body was released, an indescribable pain was transmitted into Fairy Hong Xia's body, causing her to tremble uncontrollably. Fellow Taoists, quick, block this sword light. Xiong Huasong waved his hand, no longer holding back the dermic powers in his body. His nascent soul's hand waved, and many rays of light flashed, wanting to block in front of Fairy Hong Xia. Xiang Ming and the rest scrambled to be the first, hurriedly waving their talismans to protect Fairy Hong Xia, their only hope of breaking the array. Jie, the ice phoenix celestial body cried out again, not without pain. From the ice phoenix's mouth, the connate primordial water gushed out like an upside-down waterfall, instantly covering an area of more than 100 feet. Ah? Liao Ke was really shocked. It was not that ordinary, and the rest did not consider connate items when they set up the splitting-edge 5-element sword array. But how could rare connate items be so easy to obtain? Just as Li Zongbao said, there would definitely be someone among the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators who would have such treasures. But any treasure that had 1 or 2 drops, or even 1 or 2 wisps, would be considered extremely lucky. How could they have thought of that? Fairy Hong Xia's connate primordial water could not be measured with drops. It could be measured with 10 feet, 10 feet. Of course, Fairy Hong Xia was still fine. If Xiao Hua were here, not to mention connate primordial water, even a connate jellyfish would be able to scare Liao Ke to death. Not good. While Liao Ke was screaming in his heart, Xiong Huasong and the rest were overjoyed. A few of them flew up and surrounded Fairy Hong Xia. They did not hope to kill Liao Ke, but as long as they could protect Fairy Hong Xia, this array would definitely be broken. Indeed, Fairy Hong Xia did not disappoint them. Although the ice phoenix celestial body flapped its wings with some difficulty, the 100 feet of Xiantian primordial water grew larger and larger. It was like a blue wave that mended the heavens, smoothly supporting the falling fireflies. Although this splitting-edge 5 elemental sword formation was very strange, as every part of the formation could condense sword light out of thin air and form flying swords, to a golden core cultivator, the most threatening thing was still the swarming fireflies in the eye of the formation. Fairy Hong Xia's primordial water blocked these fireflies, causing the 5 elemental swords to be annihilated by the primordial water. Very quickly, the spirit talismans produced by the golden core cultivators began to shine brilliantly again. At this time, the golden core cultivators really couldn't care less about holding anything back. Although the hand of a nascent soul required a large amount of heaven and earth spiritual chi, which was far from what the formation could provide, they still channeled their true essence from their golden cores and poured their magic power into the talisman. Liao Ke could no longer hold back. With a cry, its body expanded rapidly, and with a flap of its wings, it shot towards the ice phoenix celestial body like a shooting star. Rumble with a loud sound. The peacock slammed into the spirit talisman protecting Fairy Hong Xia. This strange peacock was really strong, to be able to knock the nascent soul's hand askew and rush out of the gap. The ice phoenix celestial body cried out in pain. It was the peacock that had stretched out its claws and grabbed onto the wings of the ice phoenix celestial body. How strong was the body of the peacock that could knock the nascent soul's hand away? In an instant, it tore off a piece of the ice phoenix celestial body's wing. Fairy Hong Xia cried out in pain. Her body trembled violently, and the ice phoenix celestial body trembled as well. At the same time, The Ice Phoenix celestial body fell rapidly, as if it wanted to retract into Fairy Hong Xia's body. How dare you? De Sun and Xiang Ming's nascent soul's hands grabbed at the peacock's wings at the same time. The peacock did not dare to delay and hurriedly flapped its wings and flew up. Junior disciple, hold on for a while longer. Xiong Huasong could only encourage Fairy Hong Xia. All right, Fairy Hong Xia replied. She tried her best to stabilize the Ice Phoenix celestial body and urged the Xiantian True Water to wrap around the Five Elements planetary disk. However, the closer it got to the Five Elements planetary disk, the more sword lights there were, and the more Xiantian True Water was consumed. Fairy Hong Xia did not care about the consumption of Xiantian True Water, but the sword chi from the sword lights was something she could not bear. Fairy Hong Xia did not temper her bones like Xiao Hua, and her body did not have the strength of 10,000 caddies. The sword chi was as heavy as a mountain, and when it collided with the true water, she was unable to take another step forward. Xiong Huasong seemed to have noticed the abnormality as well, and hurriedly shouted, Senior Sister Hong Xia, if you have any more true water, surround it from all sides. Just hold on for a while longer. All right. Fairy Hong Xia gritted her teeth. The Ice Phoenix celestial body was already damaged, and several more streams of true water surged out, surrounding the Five Elements planetary disk. Ga, the peacock was sent flying by the Yuanying stage's hand. It soared in midair, and with a long cry, it swooped down again. However, a loud explosion sounded, and Fairy Hong Xia's Xiantian True Water was completely shattered by this explosion. The Ice Phoenix celestial body could not hold on any longer and quickly retreated into Fairy Hong Xia's body. The impact of this explosion also injured Fairy Hong Xia, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was pale, and she almost fainted in midair. Amidst the explosion, countless sword lights scattered. The five-colored light had already dispersed, and the five giant swords and the Five Elements planetary disk were scattered in midair. What made Xiong Huasong and the rest happy was that the five flying swords were much dimmer than before. They must have used up a lot of energy to activate this sword formation. Fellow Taoists, this is the best time to kill this fiend. Hung Hung waved the spirit talisman in his hand, and the giant hand flashed in midair, grabbing at one of the flying swords. The powerful restrictive force immediately passed through space and covered the giant hand. That's right. Kill. Xiang Ming shouted, and several golden core spirit talismans swayed as they flew over. Ha ha ha, a shrill voice sounded out. We have been setting up this formation for 8 years, and we wanted to kill 100,000 cultivators, who knew that the heavens were unfair, and the formation was broken by a foundation establishment cultivator. I am not resigned to this. I will not yield. As he spoke, the giant yellow-red sword light suddenly shone brightly. It was the transformation of the white and fat swordswoman. What is there to love in life? What is there to fear in death? End here, sword domain, transforming into a sword to support the snowy mountains. The giant green sword also let out a hearty laugh, and then light scattered in all directions. Fellow swordsmen, the Five Elements planetary disk gradually revealed its ordinary figure, and its plain face revealed a look of shock. Even Liao Ke, who was far away, was shocked. We swore to kill 100,000 cultivators, and now there are only a few tens of thousands left. How can we meet LV Jianyu? How can we meet the fallen swordsman of Sword Domain? Within the pitch-black sword light, Bai Tianming's voice was extremely solemn as he said, We have made up our minds. Fellow swordsmen, there is no need to stop us. Ha ha ha. The three-sword sect is already like this. How can we not follow? Xiao Jinding's arrogant voice also came from the silver-white sword light. There was no movement within the giant blue sword, but the sword light suddenly shone brightly. This was Luo Shuelon's will. Enough, enough, enough. Ordinary shouted. If you don't have my help, how are you going to kill 100,000 cultivators? As he spoke, Ordinary's figure disappeared again, and the Five Elements planetary disk shone with bright starlight. Oh no! De Sun and the rest were shocked. Knowing that the swordsman was going to fight like a cornered beast, They quickly withdrew the spirit talismans in their hands. At this moment, the pitch-black sword light flashed rapidly, flying towards Fairy Hong Xia. I will kill this woman first. Dodge. Xiang Ming shouted hurriedly, activating the spirit talisman in his hand. However, he was already retreating, and if he hurriedly activated it again, how could he block the giant sword in time? In an instant, the sword light had arrived beside Fairy Hong Xia. How could Fairy Hong Xia possibly dodge such an attack that was comparable to a sword? Xiaohuo. Fairy Hong Xia's body was already supporting herself in mid-air. At this moment, her face was calm as she closed her eyes and murmured. Unfortunately, Xiaohua was now trapped in the Brahma Golden Palace, fighting with Yutong. How could he appear here? How dare you hurt my Dao sect disciple? Just as Fairy Hong Xia was about to die, a loud shout came from the side. It was Li Zongbao, who was guarding the left side. The immortal piercing whip was like a dragon as it struck towards the giant sword. Of course, Li Zongbao was only in the late foundation establishment stage, and the immortal piercing whip was only in the early golden core stage. It could not block a sword attack, but how could Li Zongbao not use the immortal piercing whip? Boom! With a loud sound, the immortal piercing whip was like a lonely golden dragon as it was struck by the sword. However, the sword was also struck by the huge force of the immortal piercing whip. It brushed past Fairy Hong Xia's robe and flew out. Bai Tianming was also at the point where he was about to die. Lucky! Xiang Ming exclaimed in his heart. However, Li Zongbao spat out a mouthful of blood and his body withered in midair. Big Senior Li. Fairy Hong Xia broke out in cold sweat and hurriedly flew down. She touched her storage bag and took out the elixirs given to her by Xiaohua. She hurriedly took one for herself and gave another to Li Zongbao. I have my own. Li Zongbao waved his hand and rejected her flatly. Xiaohua gave this to me. Fairy Hong Xia said hurriedly. Li Zongbao looked at the ugly elixir in Fairy Hong Xia's hand and frowned slightly. He whispered, "Oh?" It was as if he had understood something, but also as if he was confused. However, Li Zongbao took it without hesitation and swallowed it. However, before he could circulate his energy to dissolve the elixir, he heard 5 consecutive loud explosions. 5 balls of sword light rushed wildly from 5 different directions towards the surrounding cultivators. At the same time, under the activation of the 5 elements planetary disk, countless 5-colored sword lights rushed out from the ground. These sword lights were attracted by the 5 balls of sword light and turned into 5 element swords that were a few feet long. They stabbed wildly towards the Dao sect cultivators. This last bloodbath of the 5 element swords formation was 10 times more powerful than the previous one. The individual sword lights were several times faster than the previous one. The power of the sword chi was also several times stronger. In just a moment, continuous screams could be heard everywhere and blood was everywhere. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the continuous 5-colored sword lights gradually disappeared. -11. Chapter 2676. When they looked at the sky again, the strange peacock had already flown away. The 5 elements planet plate also did not transform into an ordinary body. With a flash in the sky, it disappeared just like how it had appeared before. No one knew where it went. Calm down, calm down. Seeing the sorrowful scene, the group of Dao sect practitioners did not know what to do. There were even many disciples with strong Dao hearts who were hysterical. They looked around with red eyes, as if they were about to attack at any time. Heng Zhao and the rest knew that the minds of these disciples had been invaded by the madness of the 6 sword practitioners. How would they dare to be negligent? They hurriedly flew into the sky and shouted, "The sword practitioners' formation has been broken by us. Take some pills and meditate for a while." More than 10 golden core cultivators stood in 4 different directions and cried out anxiously. The other golden core early stage and late stage foundation establishment disciples also came to their senses and flew to different directions, comforting the disciples of the various sects one by one. Cough cough, senior brothers, junior brothers. Li Zongbao slowly flew up, his body covered in blood. His voice was a little hoarse and low, but his tone was firm. We have broken this formation. 5 second-grade illusory swordsmen are nothing more than this. Compared to the third-grade illusory sword Qingjian, they are far inferior. Look. With that said, Li Zongbao pointed at Fairy Hongxia, who was not far away, and smiled. It's Fairy Hongxia from Huanhua sect. It's our junior sister, who is only at the middle foundation establishment stage, who broke this so-called 5 elements splitting edge sword formation by herself. Think about it. How powerful can sword practitioners be? Didn't they just rely on an encirclement? Didn't they just have hundreds of thousands of swordsmen hiding in the dark? How can those cowardly swordsmen, who do not dare to fight openly with us Taoist sect cultivators, be a match for us? Fairy Hongxia's face was slightly red, and she immediately understood Li Zongbao's meaning. She hurriedly flew to Li Zongbao's side and smiled. That smile was so shy that it made Zijihua blush. Senior brothers, although we are in danger and have exhausted our powers, we can still break through this formation. But, with just my own dermic powers, I can break this array. There's no other reason. My Dao sect has countless dermic spells, and none of them are something that the barbarian sword cultivators of Huan country can touch. Isn't this 5 elemental sword array my Dao sect's 5 elemental array? Little sister had only used a few drops of innate primordial water to break their formation. Little sister really didn't know what to say anymore. These 5 illusory swordsmen were probably too ashamed to meet their master, so they had no choice but to self-detonate. Ha ha ha, even though Fairy Hongxia repeated Li Zongbao's words a lot, and even some of her words did not convey her meaning, the last sentence made everyone laugh out loud. Although the comforting words of Hong Zhao and the others were somewhat effective, they were golden core cultivators after all. Their mental state was different from that of most foundation establishment cultivators. It was a form of intimidation that came from above. But Fairy Hongxia was different. She was only a female cultivator in the later stages of foundation establishment. She looked extremely beautiful and even seemed a little weak. If a female cultivator like her was not afraid, the male cultivators' hearts would naturally be filled with a desire to win, and even a determination to protect her. Therefore, Fairy Hongxia's words were much more effective than Hong Zhao and the rest's comforting words. The group of cultivators gradually calmed down, and the faith in their hearts was restored. After all, everyone had seen with their own eyes that Fairy Hongxia had controlled the innate primordial water to force the 5 elements planetary disk to respond. Just a drop of innate primordial water was enough to break the eye of the array. What about innate primordial fire? What about other innate items? They must be able to do it too. And these items were not rare in the hands of cultivators. If Fairy Hongxia could do it, they naturally believed that they could do it as well. It was just that they were too far away from the 5 elements planetary disk. Faith was the most magical thing. For example, Zhongpei and the rest had consumed spiritual seeds. Although they could change their physiques according to the spiritual seeds in order to adapt to the changes in the heaven and earth spiritual qi, this adaptation was useful for ordinary people. To them, it had little effect. But why did their cultivation progress so rapidly? It was because they believed that they could succeed. They believed that they could rely on the spiritual seeds and Taoist Zhao's magical cultivation to succeed. Therefore, they succeeded. This could be explained by a firm Dao heart. Everyone in the sword formation was the same. Previously, their Dao hearts had been destroyed by the bloodbath. After Fairy Hongxia's words, they changed their minds. Their Dao hearts were strengthened, and the entire sword formation was stabilized. Even the morale of the cultivators was boosted. Great! Hong Zhao and the rest heaved a long sigh of relief. Hong Zhao looked at Li Zongbao with gratification, and then looked deeply at Fairy Hongxia. His eyes shone with a trace of brilliance. Xiangming was even more delighted. The credit for breaking the formation belonged to the Huanhua sect. After Li Zongbao's words and Fairy Hongxia's encouragement, the morale of the entire battlefield changed, and the name of the Huanhua sect became even more resounding. The Huanhua sect, which had always been lukewarm in the battle of Dao cultivators, was now famous. Besides the Utmost Happiness faction, Imperial Thunder faction, Xuanyan School, Xintian sect, and other famous disciples, the Huanhua sect was not to be outdone. Of course, Xiang Ming looked at Fairy Hongxia and Li Zhongbao thoughtfully. But how would Fairy Hongxia know about this? She looked at Li Zhongbao's bloodstains and thought for a while. She clapped her hands and took out a jade bottle. She whispered, "Senior brother Li, can you take another pill?" If Fairy Hongxia had not mentioned this, Li Zhongbao might not have thought of it. But when he saw Fairy Hongxia's jade bottle, Li Zhongbao activated his heart skill again, and his face was immediately filled with astonishment. "Junior sister Hongxia, this pill. How many more do you have?" Li Zhongbao asked, puzzled. "Oh." Fairy Hongxia was naturally stunned. "Senior brother Li, senior sister Hongxia." At this moment, Xiao Mao's voice came from afar. This guy was also covered in blood and looked even worse than Li Zhongbao, but his face was filled with joy and even excitement. You're not dead too." Li Zhongbao nodded lightly. "Why did you only come to find me now?" Xiao Mao was used to Li Zhongbao's indifference. He bowed slightly to the two of them and smiled. "I've been wanting to find senior brother Li for a long time, so that you can protect me. But this sword array is really messy. I don't dare to walk around blindly. I can only follow my fellow brothers. Just now, when senior brother Li and senior sister Hongxia broke the 5-element sword array, I saw the two of you. Plus, the dozens of senior brothers who joined forces with me were all killed. I had no choice but to find senior brother Li. There must be another sword array after this one. You can follow me." Fairy Hongxia knew that Xiao Mao and Xiao Hua had some connections. She nodded slightly. "Thank you, senior sister." Xiao Mao said hurriedly, "Give it to me." Li Zhongbao stretched out his hand and said to Xiao Mao, puzzled, "What?" Xiao Mao scratched his head. "Elixir. The elixir that Xiao Hua gave you." Li Zhongbao seemed to be a man of few words. "Oh." Xiao Mao understood. He took out a jade bottle and handed it to Li Zhongbao. Li Zhongbao took the jade bottle and crushed it. He looked inside and sniffed it. He frowned slightly and raised his head. "Is there more?" Xiao Mao couldn't take it anymore. He whispered, "Big brother Xiao gave this to me in private. I heard that it was an elixir that he obtained with great difficulty. Senior brother Li only needs one." "Nonsense. Is there more?" Li Zhongbao couldn't be bothered to beat around the bush and asked directly. Xiao Mao felt wronged and whispered, "There is more. But this is my life-saving item. Just now, I almost died. Senior brother Li, why do you need so many elixirs?" Fairy Hongxia was also surprised. She couldn't understand why Li Zhongbao was so strong. She didn't know that Li Zhongbao's parting love treasure mirror had already been completed. "You and I are just foundation establishment disciples. In the future, we still have to rely on golden core masters to break the array." Li Zhongbao only said this and didn't say anything else. Fairy Hongxia and Xiao Mao weren't stupid. They understood immediately. The two of them thought for a while, and each took out a few more jade bottles from their storage bags and handed them to Li Zhongbao. Li Zhongbao took them and said calmly, "I will only give these to the golden core masters and say that they are for the two of you. I won't say anything else. As for the senior uncles of Huanhua sect and Xuanyan sect, you can give them to them yourselves." As he spoke, he turned and flew into the air. Xiao Hua didn't give senior brother Li any elixirs. Once Li Zhongbao left, Fairy Hongxia whispered to Xiao Mao, "This, I don't know." Xiao Mao was a little embarrassed. He didn't know if Li Zhongbao had any. However, it was obvious that Li Zhongbao didn't have any. Even if he did, it wouldn't be such a good elixir. "Is senior brother Li angry?" Xiao Mao asked tentatively. "How would I know?" Fairy Hongxia pursed her lips. She was a little embarrassed and angry at Xiao Hua's stinginess. Seeing Fairy Hongxia turn and fly towards Xiang Ming, Xiao Mao also took out a few elixirs and flew towards Gao Wei. Li Zhongbao's prediction was right. Many golden core cultivators had used the golden core in their dantian to forcefully activate their talismans. Their meridians and golden core were damaged. It was just that the situation just now was dangerous, and no one dared to be careless. There were even a few who did the same thing as Bai Tianming, and the rest when they were in a desperate situation. Who would care about that little bit of damage? But at this moment, when they were adjusting their breathing, they felt that there was something wrong with their meridians. If it was a normal situation, they could just meditate and recuperate for a few days. But now it was a matter of life and death. If they didn't rush out of the sword array, they could die at any time. No one dared to underestimate these injuries. Just as the group of golden core cultivators were thinking about which elixirs to consume, Li Zongbao presented the elixirs. Naturally, he gave them to Heng Heng first. Heng Ju said with a smile, "Master saw it all. Give this elixir to the other uncle masters. Master has another elixir here." "Master, you take it." Li Zongbao didn't explain. "I just took it. It's better than the elixirs of our sect." "Oh." Heng Heng raised his eyebrows and looked at Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao, who were flying towards their respective sections. However, he had always trusted this disciple of his. He didn't hesitate and reached out to take it. But just as he was about to consume it, he was stunned. The appearance of this elixir was really too ugly. -11. Chapter 2677. I'll be releasing more chapters in the next 2 days. I hope that fellow Taoists with monthly votes can give me some monthly votes, recommendation votes, cash, and the like. Hashtag 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 -11. Chapter 2678. This ugly pill did not even have a hint of medicinal fragrance. What kind of pill was this? However, when Heng Zhao saw the faint runes on the surface of the pill, his eyes flashed with surprise. "Master, take it first. Everything can wait until after the battle." Li Zongbao did not hesitate to cut off Heng Zhao's line of questioning. "All right." Heng Zhao swallowed it immediately. Indeed, after a short while, Heng Zhao's eyebrows trembled uncontrollably. "Master, give it to the other uncle masters." Li Zongbao held up the jade bottle and said, "This is the pill obtained by junior sister Hong Xia from Huanhua sect and junior brother Xiao Mao from Xuanyan sect. Come with me." Heng Zhao sighed in his heart and did not take the pill. He turned around and flew towards Dasun. Li Zongbao knew that his master was doing this for his own good. Even though the pill was not his, if he gave it to the other uncle masters, he would owe him a huge favor. However, Li Zongbao's expression did not change as he flew behind Heng Zhao. Xiangming had already taken the pill. When he saw Fairy Hong Xia flying over, he smiled and said, "Junior sister Hong Xia, you can keep this pill for yourself." As he spoke, he looked at Li Zongbao, who was following Heng Zhao to distribute the pills. He said, "This favor should have been yours. However, if you are willing to give it to Li Zongbao, I will not say anything. You have contributed so much in the battle, and Li Zongbao has also contributed greatly. You don't have to say anything to your master. Even if the sect leader comes forward, I will agree." "Ah?" Fairy Hong Xia was taken aback. Her face flushed red. She had not expected Xiang Ming to have such thoughts. However, just as Fairy Hong Xia was about to explain, a sigh came from behind her. "Sigh, junior sister Hong Xia. This old woman has failed you." Fairy Hong Xia quickly turned around and saw that it was Mingyu. However, there were only a few disciples behind Mingyu. Ji Mingxiu and the rest were not among them. Fairy Hong Xia immediately understood. Ji Mingxiu had most likely perished. As expected, Mingyu smiled bitterly. The 5-element sword formation was really fierce just now. My powers are limited and I cannot absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from outside. Hence, I could not take care of so many disciples. Uncle Master Mingyu. Fairy Hong Xia's heart turned sour as she whispered, "To be able to protect you until now, junior apprentice Sister Ji and the others have already." At this point, Fairy Hong Xia could no longer speak. The smiling faces of Ji Mingxiu and the others kept appearing in her mind. "Martial uncle, this is a type of spirit pill that disciple obtained. Please take it." Fairy Hong Xia obediently passed the elixir to Mingyu. "I hope that Martial Ant will be able to protect even more disciples after consuming it." Yes, because Bright Moon had protected so many Foundation Establishment disciples, She had sustained some internal injuries and had not had the time to consume any pills. Now that she saw Fairy Hong Xia offering her a gift, she accepted it without hesitation. Naturally, when she saw this ugly pill, she had the same expression as Hung Ting. It seemed like judging a person by their appearance and judging a pill by their appearance were all the same. Luckily, Mingyu took into account Fairy Hong Xia's eagerness and reluctantly swallowed it. After Mingyu consumed the pill, her face instantly blossomed with surprise. Female cultivators were never as profound as male cultivators. Mingyu immediately asked curiously, What pill is this? Why is it so effective?" "I don't know," Fairy Hong Xia said with a smile. "I obtained it by accident. This spirit pill is even more miraculous than the 9 transformation cloud spirit pill of my Huanhua sect." Mingyu asked in disbelief, "Where did you get it?" "At a market in Sky Patrol City." Fairy Hong Xia was proud in her heart, but her face was expressionless. "Give me one." Xiang Ming had to take it seriously. "Yes." Fairy Hong Xia took out another pill and smiled. "I only have a few left." "Yes, I understand." Xiang Ming nodded. After taking it, he looked at it and sniffed it, then said softly, "This looks similar to the spring return pill from Sky Patrol City." "Yes, I also thought that it was the spring return pill." Fairy Hong Xia said immediately, "Therefore, I used all I had to snatch many spirit pills." Then, Fairy Hong Xia said regretfully, "It's a pity that this is not the spring return pill. Even if it's not the spring return pill, it must have been refined by the mysterious alchemy master." Xiang Ming took the pill and turned to look for Hung Zhao. Just now, Fairy Hong Xia had given it to him, but he had rejected it. Now, he had taken it, completely ignoring what Fairy Hong Xia had said. "My fellow cultivator Hung Zhao, the spirit pill of my Huanhua sect is indeed extraordinary." Xiang Ming shouted from afar, "I think it's the work of the mysterious alchemy master." Hung Zhao rolled his eyes and almost said, "I've already said that I'm a disciple of the Huanhua sect and the Xuanyan sect. You don't have to make such a big fuss." However, Hung Zhao still said calmly, "Yes, we've all taken it. This spirit pill is indeed extraordinary. My fellow cultivator Xiang, you've already known before taking it?" "Well, of course, I know the efficacy of the elixirs made by the disciples of the Huanhua sect." Xiang Ming kept mentioning the Huanhua sect proudly. De Sun looked at Fairy Hong Xia, who was not far away, and smiled. Previously, Li Zongbao from the Utopia sect, Xiao Mao from the Xuanyan sect, and Xiao Hua from the Imperial Thunder sect killed Qin Jian. Now, Fairy Hong Xia of the Huanhua sect has broken the array and made a contribution. She even gave us Golden Core cultivators a spirit pill. We owe her a debt of gratitude. This is a great contribution. Hee. Xiang Ming could not stop smiling. De Sun knew that Xiao Mao was also part of the Xuanyan sect spirit pill. Since Gao Wei was not around, he did not bring Xiao Mao along. After a while, many of the Golden Core cultivators had taken the spirit pills. Hung Zhao looked at the disciples resting in the sword array and said worriedly, "Everyone, this 5-element splitting-edge sword array has been broken by us. But we're still in the sword array. If the swordsmen suddenly attack, I'm afraid we won't be able to handle it." I'd like them to attack." Xiong Huasong laughed coldly. "If the sword cultivators abandon the sword array and attack directly, it'll be our fortune." Hung Zhao thought for a moment and knew that Xiong Huasong's words made sense. He had not thought it through. He nodded and said, "Brother Xiong, you're indeed an expert in array formations. I can't compare to you. Everyone has their own strengths." Xiong Huasong said politely, "We'd like to see what kind of sword array LV Ruochang has set up after the 5 elements splitting-edge sword array." Previously, the yin-yang sword array was targeted at disciples below the foundation establishment stage. This 5-element splitting-edge sword array seems to be targeted at disciples above the foundation establishment stage. I'm afraid that the next sword array will face us Golden Core cultivators directly. At this point, Xiong Huasong's tone changed and he said in a strange tone, "But I'm curious. What kind of strange sword array can a sword cultivator have that can kill us Golden Core cultivators? Was there no such thing in the previous battle?" Hung Zhao asked softly. "Of course there was." Xiong Huasong said weakly. But there were no records of the yin-yang sword array and the 5 elements splitting-edge sword array. Therefore, I don't have a good way to break it. Therefore, this Xiong will be very... Xiong Huasong wanted to say that he was looking forward to it, but he felt that it was inappropriate. He could only listen and change his tone. Fellow Taoist Hung Ming, you'd better take a look at the damage of these 2 arrays first. We'll also be able to calm ourselves and prepare for the new sword array. Hung Zhao was a little troubled. How many layers does this sword array have? I really don't know. Maybe it's already gone. Maybe there will be more in the future. Xiong Huasong shrugged as if he didn't say anything. Then, Hung Zhao instructed Li Zongbao to find disciples to check on the casualties of the cultivators. In addition, he sent a golden core cultivator to lead a dozen late-stage foundation establishment disciples to scout ahead. Now that the array had been broken to this extent, Hung Zhao and the rest were really going all out. They no longer charged blindly outside like before. They could only conserve their energy and prepare to face the enemies who had been lying in ambush for 8 years. Hung Zhao's heart ached at the thought of 8 years. This kind of planning was definitely not something he could do. Not long after, Li Zongbao flew over with a gloomy expression. Hung Zhao's heart skipped a beat when he saw his disciple who practiced the parting treasured mirror in such a state. Master, Li Zongbao transmitted his voice to him. Now, our Dao sect disciples still have more than 160,000? How did we lose so many? Although Hung Zhao already had a premonition, he couldn't help but be shocked when he heard this shocking number. According to what I know, in the earliest yin-yang sword array, our Dao sect disciples lost close to 90,000 people. Most of them were Qi refinement and early-stage foundation establishment disciples. There were also a few golden core uncle masters. Li Zongbao said bitterly. And in the 5-element sword array just now, although there were no golden core uncle masters killed, we lost more than 100,000 people, especially the last 5 cultivators of the second stage of the illusory sword realm. More than 40,000 people died. Hiss, Hung Zhao couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The 10-direction annihilation array was already very powerful, but he had never heard Xiong Huasong arrogantly say that it could kill 40,000 swordsmen in one go. This sword array killed 40,000 cultivators in the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The sword array is indeed a great weapon. It's really different from an array. Hung Zhao murmured. He couldn't help but feel a trace of regret in his heart. Master. Li Zongbao immediately understood Hung Zhao's thoughts. He said anxiously, you don't have to blame yourself. Lu Ruochang has been lying in ambush here for more than 8 years. Even if you didn't command the disciples to pursue, she would definitely have released the bait. So, with that, Li Zongbao glanced at the other golden core cultivators and transmitted his voice again. According to the Uncle Master's thoughts, they would definitely pursue, chase, and beat the dog in the water. But Hung Zhao still wanted to say something, but Li Zongbao didn't wait for him to finish. He said, defeat and success are due to this battle. Master, now we have no way out. If we break this sword array, we will have our lives and Master's reputation will be established. If this sword array is not broken, all of this is meaningless. Master, don't think too much. -11. Chapter 2679. That's right. Hung Zhao exhaled deeply and turned to look into the distance. Master, you're overthinking. Sometimes you even think of Qian Mo from the Imperial Thunder sect. Master, Uncle Qian is Uncle Qian, and you are you. Although Li Zongbao was shocked, he still pretended to be indifferent. Uncle Qian thinks too much and does too little. Even what he can do is too little. You're on duty in the conference hall and have been entrusted by the sect leader. You just have to do what you want. Who would be without fault? Our Utopia faction has the capital to support Master's mistakes, but the Imperial Thunder sect doesn't. Hearing this, Hung Zhao felt relieved. He was really too involved to see the situation clearly. Li Zongbao's last sentence reminded him. Yes, even if he killed hundreds of thousands of disciples, then so what? He Ping Zhenren would never punish him. Hung Zhao's mind was set. He immediately whispered, that's strange. We've been breaking the 5 elements sword formation for so long. Why haven't we heard the sound of the sword formation? Could it be that all the great arrays have been broken? Li Zongbao thought for a moment and whispered, "That's possible. The Yin-Yang sword formation is more than 10 miles wide. Our Taoist sect lost nearly 100,000 people, and there are at least 300,000 swordsmen. The 5 elements sword formation, our Taoist sect lost nearly 150,000 people, and there are even more swordsmen. How could there not be at least 400,000? That's 700,000 swordsmen. Where did the Huan Kingdom get so many swordsmen? Even if they did, would they be willing to invest? A sword formation is different from a magic formation." Hung Ming smiled. "Moreover, we broke out from the same direction and didn't disperse our forces. The sword cultivators didn't really need to surround us with 300,000 swordsmen. I feel that 200,000 swordsmen would be enough. If they really had 700,000, they would have killed their way out long ago. Why would they need to set up a sword formation?" "Haha, you're right, master. I've learned a lot." Li Zongbao saw Hung Zhao smile and felt relieved. Besides, until now, LV Ruochong and the other swordsmen of level 3 of the illusory sword realm are still missing. I'm afraid that they were seriously injured in the 10-party annihilation formation and can't hold the fort. If they come out now, we really don't know how to deal with them. Forget it, you, Fairy Hong Xia, and Xiao Mao should make some preparations. There are some things that I know you can't do, but you have to do them. However, you must be clear in your heart that you should try your best not to do these things. After all, the Great Tao is the most important thing." "Oh? What?" Li Zongbao was stunned. Hung Zhao's but, try your best made him a little confused. Unfortunately, Hung Ming did not explain. He turned around and flew towards Desun and the others. "Do you still have any medicinal pills?" Li Zongbao flew to the side of Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao. Some of the Foundation establishment stage disciples around the two of them tactfully dispersed. Li Zongbao said to the two of them without any trace of politeness, "There are still some left." Fairy Hong Xia had already told Li Zongbao. Now that he asked again, she hurriedly transmitted her voice. "If Senior Brother Li wants some, I'll give them to you. Senior Brother, don't be angry with Xiao Hua. It's not that Xiao Hua doesn't want to give some to Senior Brother Li. I'm afraid he doesn't have much left himself." "Give me one first," Li Zongbao said coldly. "When I see that bastard, I'll settle the score with him." Hee. Seeing that Fairy Hong Xia's face was a little ugly, Xiao Mao hurriedly took out a jade bottle and passed it to Li Zongbao. He smiled and said, "Senior Brother Li has always been cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Senior Sister Hong Xia, don't mind me. I've benefited a lot from following Senior Brother Li." Li Zongbao did not stand on ceremony. He took the medicinal pills and said lightly, "The special task force of the conference hall originally had 3 people. Now that Xiao Hua is not around, Junior Sister Hong Xia is his replacement. There's only one person left and right. The 3 of us will break through the formation together." "Yes." Xiao Mao was overjoyed. However, Fairy Hong Xia's face was flushed red. When Li Zongbao said there's only one person left and right, he only meant that whether it was Xiao Hua or Fairy Hong Xia, they were all one person. However, in her ears, it was one person, 2 people, one person. How embarrassing. Li Zongbao did not think too much about it. He flicked his sleeves and flew away. Xiao Mao stood guard beside Fairy Hong Xia respectfully. When the blush on Fairy Hong Xia's face faded, he accompanied her and chased after Li Zongbao. Xiao Mao was clear that although Fairy Hong Xia's cultivation was higher than his and she had the protection of the innate primordial water, he still had to help Fairy Hong Xia guard against sudden attacks from sword cultivators. Even if he died, he could not let Fairy Hong Xia be hurt in the slightest. The relationship between Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Hua was still unclear. However, Xiao Mao could still remember the scene of Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Hua meeting each other. He could not repay Xiao Hua much, but if he could protect Fairy Hong Xia, it was also his own goodwill. In fact, sometimes it was not important how much one could do. The key was the kind of goodwill that was extremely important. Hung Jiao flew to Desun's side and looked at the group of golden core cultivators. The smile on his face disappeared and he said, "Fellow cultivators, have you rested well? We have already broken through 2 sword formations. I'm afraid there will be a fierce battle ahead. LV Ruochong and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen have not appeared yet. We should hurry. If these strong cultivators recover, we— At this point, Hung Ji's expression suddenly changed slightly. That's right. Since the first 2 sword formations were targeted at Qi refinement and foundation establishment, then the sword formation at the back would naturally target golden core cultivators. Wouldn't LV Ruochong and the others be waiting in front? Desun and the rest naturally understood. On the other hand, Xiong Huasong was very clear about his own formation. He smiled and said, "Fellow cultivator Hung Ming, you worry too much. Even if LV Ruochong and the rest took the elixir that martial nephew Zhong Bao brought, they would need a few days to recover. I dare to guarantee that the one in front is definitely not LV Ruochong." At the same time, Desun's expression changed and he asked, "Fellow cultivator Hung Ming, how are the casualties of our Dao sect cultivators? I haven't heard anything from you yet." This, Hung Jiao pondered for a moment and said in a low voice, "Our Dao sect cultivators have suffered heavy casualties. Right now, there are only 160,000 disciples left." Oh? Desun and the rest's expressions changed and they looked at each other. Why are there so many? Xiong Huasong was a little speechless. If we don't break through the sword formations, these 160,000 disciples will be meat on the chopping block. Hung Jiao was unable to answer. He narrowed his eyes and looked ahead. There was no longer any rain in the sword tomb, and there was a slight mist. It was this mist that completely blocked everyone's vision, and they could not see far. "Let's go." Xiong Huasong did not hesitate and said anxiously, "There are still no sword cries. I'm afraid that the sword formations are not ready yet. We have to act quickly." As soon as the Golden Core cultivators moved, the group of resting foundation building disciples also flew out. There were still quite a few surviving aura refining disciples who had long been impatient. However, their cultivation levels weren't high, so they didn't have any special power to fight back in the sword formation. Most of them relied on luck. They knew that they were flying fast and not skillfully, so they didn't dare to say anything. The remaining 160,000 Dao sect disciples remained in their original small groups. Each sect formed a simple formation and slowly flew up and advanced. Hung Jiao and the other Golden Core cultivators flew in front, while Li Zongbao and the other disciples followed behind. After flying for a few miles, just as everyone was starting to relax, the disciple who had gone out to scout returned. That Golden Core cultivator was Qi Ming from the Taiching sect. Seeing the strange expression on Qi Ming's face, Hung Jiao's heart skipped a beat. He knew that things were not good. "Greetings, senior brother Hung Jiao." Qi Ming bowed. Hung Jiao saw Qi Ming's reaction and felt at ease. He smiled and said, "How is the scouting ahead? Looking at you, could it be that there is no sword formation left?" "That's not it." Qi Ming shook his head and said, "About 2 miles ahead, there are sword cultivators. But from what I see, it can't be considered an ambush. After all, they are. If you have something to say it quickly." Desun could not help but scold. "Why are you still like this at a time like this?" Qi Ming's face was slightly red. He did not dare to argue with Desun and said, "I was ordered to get to the point. What kind of ambush do the sword cultivators have?" Desun's face was red with anger. He almost scolded him again. "Little brother, I can't say that there is an ambush ahead, but there are more than 10 sword cultivators hovering in midair." Qi Ming stuttered. He did not know what to say to satisfy Desun. "Haha, junior brother Qi, speak slowly. Why are those sword cultivators hovering in midair? Are there no other sword cultivators? There is also no sword Qi or sword light on the ground." Hung Jiao smiled and said, "I see that you look very relaxed. I don't think this counts as an ambush, right?" Qi Ming heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Exactly. There are more than 10 sword cultivators hovering in midair in front of us. However, they are arranged in a strange formation. There is no sword light or sword Qi nearby. In fact, there is not even a trace of killing intent. If you say that it is a sword formation, it is definitely not. However, if it is not a sword formation, what is the use of them being in such a formation? What else?" Hung Jiao's interest was piqued. He asked curiously, "They are just looking at you? There is no movement?" "Not only is there no movement, they are treating I as if I am nothing." Qi Ming was a little flustered. It seemed that he was really angry. However, there are a few second-grade illusory sword cultivators among them. I did not dare to act rashly. I only observed from afar and did not dare to approach them. What about the other disciples? Hung Jiao looked at the few disciples standing respectfully behind Qi Ming. It was obvious that there were fewer of them than the ones he had sent out. He asked, "Didn't you say that you did not make a move?" "Those disciples?" Qi Ming smiled and said, "When I saw that those swordsmen were ignoring us, I sent them to the left and right to go around and scout." Those swordsmen ignored you?" Sun frowned. "No. It seems like they did not see us." Qi Ming smiled and said, "When I came back, I already thought about it. Why don't we split up and go around them?" -11. Chapter 2680. You may leave. Sun waved his hand impatiently. "We have our own plans on how to proceed." "Yes." Qi Ming shook his head and flew to the side. Sun glanced at Qi Ming and turned to ask, "What do you think, fellow Taoist Hung Ming?" Hung Ming pondered for a moment and frowned. What fellow Taoist Qi said makes sense. But the problem is, how can we avoid them? If these 160,000 people split up, there'll be 80,000 people. It'll be easier for the sword cultivators to defeat them. Don't listen to his nonsense, Sun said. Although there are only a dozen sword cultivators in front, there must be many hidden sword cultivators. Even if these dozen sword cultivators go around these sword cultivators and scout the path behind them, they'll definitely die. If you don't believe me, let's go ahead and take a look. I bet that these disciples won't be able to return. Hee. Hung Ming could only laugh foolishly and say no more. Everyone flew forward again. Sure enough, when they were about 2 miles away, there were indeed more than 10 swordsmen in black swordsmanship hovering in the air. These dozen swordsmen stood in groups of 2s and 3s, but the distance between them was different. Every one of them was facing a different direction. Even the height at which they stood in midair was different. Only the one standing at the highest point was a slightly hunched, sharp-mouthed old man with a bitter expression. He was facing the 160,000 Dao sect swordsmen. Seeing the dense crowd of cultivators, the old man stretched his back and raised his arms as if he was loosening his bones. Then, he said loudly, "I'm Qing Feng from the Quilted Mountain sect. I've been waiting here for a long time." Qing Feng? After ordering the disciples to stop, Hung Ming flew forward and looked around. He said coldly, "There was a person called Qing Jian previously. Could he be your relative?" Qing Feng blinked and snorted. "That's a fellow swordsman from the Three Swords sect. He has nothing to do with me. Whether or not you have anything to do with him, that Qing Jian has already fallen." Hung Ming pointed. "Do you want to follow in his footsteps?" "That's right." A bitter smile appeared on Qing Feng's face. This old man already had this idea when senior brother Song Yuan died in the 10-direction annihilation Great Array. "Yes, that's right. Song Yuan is also from the Quilted Mountain sect. He's your senior brother." Hung Ju nodded. "However, my Dao sect has always been merciful. If you and I have already suffered many casualties, why don't we stop here and wait for the nascent soul masters to arrive?" Sun and the others were not far behind Hung Ju. When they heard Hung Ju's words, they couldn't help but be taken aback. They turned their heads slightly to look at Xiong Huasong. Xiong Huasong raised his head to look at Sun. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he was thinking of something. "Ha ha ha." Qing Feng raised his head to the sky and laughed. "The Great Array is already here, and you still dare to say such words. Do you think this old man is a 3-year-old child? What a joke." Hung Ju's expression didn't change. He said calmly, "Previously, your Huan country's Yin-Yang sword array and 5-element sword array had already killed hundreds of thousands of my Dao sect cultivators. The 200,000 to 300,000 sword cultivators that your sword cultivators besieged my cultivators probably don't have any spare energy to fight anymore, right? Previously, my Dao sect's 10-direction annihilation Great Array also killed tens of thousands of sword cultivator disciples. It can be considered a draw." It's reasonable for you and I to return separately. Now, your sword array. No matter how powerful it is, can it be more powerful than the previous two sword arrays? Do you have any extra disciples that you can use? Ha ha ha. Hungju, do you think that sword cultivators only have disciples that they can use? Qing Feng laughed. Even if I don't have any disciples, this old man can still kill all of you. Qing Feng, what sword array is this? Hungju hesitated slightly before asking. This old man will naturally tell you the name of this sword array. Qing Feng gritted his teeth. But not now. Is this really a sword array? Hungju felt incredulous. He released his divine telekinesis and looked up and down, but he didn't see any signs of sword light. Unexpectedly, Qing Feng didn't answer his question. Instead, he looked up to the north and said with melancholy, "Time is long, and the past is long gone. This old man never thought that I would be able to talk so much nonsense with you. Moreover, this nonsense actually makes this old man feel very comfortable. In this life, only when you're about to lose it do you realize that normal is the best." What? Hungju was shocked and quickly retreated. Clearly, he understood the meaning behind Qing Feng's words. Qing Feng had already made his decision. Buzz, a roar came from the top of Qing Feng's head. Hundreds of feet above, a yellow-skinned swordsman appeared. The swordsman's body was extremely muscular, and there was a faint light surging around him. The surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi quickly gathered toward the swordsman. This old man is Fan Mingyuan of the Seven Spirit Mountain. I've been waiting for you all here. Come, come, come. I'll let you all have a taste of the power of my devouring sword array. As Fan Mingyuan spoke, his body rapidly expanded. In a flash of light, a pagoda about 2 to 3 feet tall gradually appeared. This pagoda had 7 floors, and each floor was filled with strange runes. The runes flashed with various colors, and a faint fluctuation slowly spread in all directions. In an instant, it had spread more than 100 feet and continued to spread in all directions. Devouring sword array? Hungju finally knew the name of the sword array that Qing Feng and the others couldn't resist. As he muttered, he looked at Xiong Huasong. Xiong Huasong was also puzzled. He didn't understand the origin of this array's name. Kill. Hungju thought for a while, then waved his hand. At the same time, he clapped his hand and held the talisman in his hand, waiting to use it at any time. It's finally time, Qing Feng said in a low voice. He pointed his finger, and a green ray of sword light flashed. It hit the swordsman at the bottom of the pagoda. Pa! There was an explosion. It wasn't clear whether the swordsman was killed by the sword chi or if he had received Qing Feng's order. His entire body suddenly exploded, turning into a ball of flesh and blood. Strangely, the flesh and blood didn't fall. Instead, as the sword light stirred, the flesh and blood gradually melted, turning into a ball of pure, dirty blood. The sword light seeped into the dirty blood and turned into sword threads. Then, Qing Feng's finger moved continuously, and the sword light kept falling. In an instant, except for Qing Feng, the dozens of swordsmen all disappeared, turning into a dozen balls of dirty blood. Kill. Although the cultivators felt their hair stand on end, they still shouted. Each of them activated their Dharma treasures and attacked Qing Feng and the others, hoping to kill them before this strange sword array was activated. Seeing the Dharma treasures flying towards him, a smile appeared on Qing Feng's bitter face. He actually began to chant, just like the Tao sect's incantations. As he chanted, the green sword light around Qing Feng's body became even brighter. Kong! The loud sound of a sword rang out again in the silent surroundings. The expressions of the group of Tao sect cultivators changed drastically like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Many cultivators hurriedly looked in the direction of the sword cry. Sure enough, there were some more sword lights that shot into the sky within a few kilometers of the sword cry. The spirit-devouring array had been formed. Quick! Just as everyone was distracted, Qing Feng stretched out his hand and a pitch-black sword pouch escaped from his robes. He threw his hand, and the sword pouch fell in midair. As Qing Feng chanted the incantation, a ray of sword light hit the sword pouch. Like a cultivator refining a Dharma treasure, the sword pouch emitted a green light. Wong. A faint sound came from the sword pouch. Explode. Qing Feng's eyes widened, and the sword light around his body became even brighter. Boom. From Qing Feng's feet, a ray of blood light appeared. This blood light quickly rolled, and in the blink of an eye, it wrapped around Qing Feng, turning him into a violently rolling ball of blood. Above the ball of blood, the green sword light was like lines of runes that constantly flowed on it. Occasionally, the sword light would seep into the ball of blood, appearing and disappearing. Woo! The yellow pagoda that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone suddenly let out a strange sound. An indescribable wave of energy enveloped these balls of blood. Kong. The sword light above the dozens of balls of blood let out a long cry at the same time. The green sword light suddenly rushed out, linked together, and flew towards the green light above the sword pouch. Wong wong wong, following the sword light, the dozens of balls of blood smashed onto the sword pouch. The sword pouch became even more noisy, and it kept rolling, as if something was anxious to come out. Boom! A loud sound came. It was Li Jijia's flying sword that hit the sword pouch. The blood light above the sword pouch had a deep hole. However, that hole did not expand with the flying sword. Instead, it rapidly shrunk, and the blood light even entangled Li Jijia's flying sword. Li Jijia frowned slightly. Just as he was about to put away the flying sword, another sound rang out. The entire sword pouch exploded, and hundreds or even thousands of fist-sized pitch-black flying objects flew out from within. These flying objects were in the shape of a flat gourd. The front half was a head, and the back half was a body. The head was the same size as the body, and there were two 2-inch-long wings on the body. When the flying objects rushed out of the sword pouch, the surrounding blood immediately rushed over and covered all of the flying objects. Wong. The blood landed on the flying objects and immediately seeped into them. The bodies of the hundreds of flying objects flashed with a pitch-black brilliance, as if they had eaten ferocious spiritual herbs. As the pitch-black brilliance flashed, the belly of the flying objects gradually became bigger, and the head gradually became smaller. In the end, the head was only the size of 2 fingertips. Li Jijia's flying sword had only been withdrawn for more than 5 feet. At this time, seeing the flying objects mutate, he formed a sword seal in his hand and stabbed towards the flying objects. The sword light was like lightning, and in an instant, it pierced the stomach of the flying objects. It looked like it was going to pierce through the flying objects. Unexpectedly, just as Li Jijia had absolute confidence, the flying object suddenly turned around. On its head, the eyes that had shrunk to the size of a mung bean flashed with a blood-red brilliance. It bit down on the flying sword. Li Jijia was dumbfounded. Crunch, crunch. The brilliance on the flying sword was actually swallowed by the flying objects. -11. Chapter 2681. Buzz. While Li Jijia was still in shock, the remaining hundreds of flying creatures spread their wings and flew toward the dozens of golden core practitioners with bloodshot eyes. Spirit swallowing bug. Suddenly, Qi Ming, who was scolded by Dasun, screamed hysterically as if he had lost his parents. What? These are spirit swallowing bugs? Heng Zhao and the others were shocked. Spirit swallowing bugs were strange insects from antiquity times and ranked second in the insect scripture. They were the nemesis of Taoism practitioners. How could these golden core practitioners not have heard of them? However, they had only heard of them, and almost none of them had seen them before. Impossible! Xiong Huasong shouted, spirit swallowing bugs are half the size of a fist, and their fangs are very long, and their wings are faintly golden. These are the larvae of spirit swallowing bugs. I've seen them in a damaged insect scripture when I was young. It's definitely true. Qi Ming's face was pale, and he could no longer maintain his composure. He said desperately, Quick, let's run for our lives. Even if they are larvae, they are definitely not something we golden core practitioners can resist. To deal with spirit swallowing bugs, we can only use heavenly thunder and other things that do not belong to the 5 elements. This is the sword tomb, where thunder does not exist. Even if there are masters from the thunder-controlling sect, it will be useless. Even all our spells will be swallowed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. And if we use spells without restraint, we will feed the spirit-swallowing bugs with spiritual chi and attract more spirit-swallowing bugs. Unless a nascent soul master is here and feeds the spirit-swallowing bugs with spiritual chi. Qi Ming had already escaped far away, but his words could still be heard. Li Jijia could not help but scream. His flying sword was the closest to the spirit-swallowing bugs, and there were already 3 of them on it. In just a few words, the spirit-swallowing bugs had already swallowed most of the sword light of the flying sword. The strangest thing was that the body of the flying sword did not change much, but there was no spiritual chi in it. It was no different from an ordinary piece of iron. This is LV Ruochang's killing move to kill us. Hung Zhao could not help but feel cold. He really did not expect LV Ruochang to be able to find hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs. Even a golden core cultivator would not be able to escape from a dozen spirit-swallowing bugs. Let's go. Without hesitation, Hung Zhao hurriedly flew toward the gap between the spirit-swallowing bugs. Since Hong Hong had already fled, how could De Sun and the others still remain in the air? Seeing the empty space, they prepared to flee. However, something happened that made Hung Zhao and the other souls fly out of their bodies. The clumsy-looking spirit-swallowing bug flew very fast, like a dark light, and rushed to their front. He was not inferior to golden core cultivators like them. The strangest thing was that these hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs did not fly to other Foundation establishment stage disciples at all. Instead, they stared at all the gold core stage cultivators. Even if a dozen spirit-swallowing bugs flew to other places and prepared to attack the Foundation establishment disciples, they only flew a few feet away and then quickly flew back. High up in the sky, the pagoda that the cultivators had overlooked was emitting a faint fluctuation. Spirit-swallowing bugs feed on the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. We are golden core cultivators, and our dantian contains the golden core, which is where the spiritual chi of heaven and earth is most concentrated. Isn't that the most delicious food in the eyes of the spirit-swallowing bugs? Qi Ming could not help but show off his knowledge, but he did not dare to stop at all. The golden core cultivators fled in panic. Although the Foundation establishment stage disciples did not have to worry for the time being, how could they remain calm? Although most of them still maintained their formation, as a whole, they seemed to be in a state of complete defeat as they flew towards the west in a sorry state. But at this moment, 3 black lines suddenly streaked across the sky and landed right next to Qi Ming, blocking him in the middle. How is this possible? Qi Ming almost rubbed his eyes. These are just the larvae of the spirit-swallowing bugs. How do they know how to surround us? But how could the spirit-swallowing bugs answer his question? Before Qi Ming could fly again, the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs flew at the same time, and the black lines flashed and landed on Qi Ming's body. Oh no! Qi Ming was actually not slow, but he was actually surrounded by 3 spirit-swallowing bugs. He was really unlucky. Attack! Although Qi Ming did not dare to use powerful spells, at this moment, he did not hesitate to wave his hand and cast a Dharma incantation on the spirit-swallowing bugs. This golden core cultivator's confinement spell was very powerful. The spiritual chi within a foot of the spirit-swallowing bugs was slightly stagnant. Crack! The spirit-swallowing bugs opened their mouths slightly, and the fangs at the corners of their mouths that were not very sharp bit on the confinement spell. Immediately, the confinement spell was broken, although Qi Ming was already mentally prepared. When he saw that the confinement spell was broken so easily by a flying bug, his expression changed instantly. However, before he could think further, the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs on his left and right had already begun to devour his protective light. Attack! Qi Ming continuously cast Dharma incantations, wanting to block the spirit-swallowing bugs. Unfortunately, before he could cast a Dharma incantation, his Dharma incantation was quickly devoured by the spirit-swallowing bugs and could only delay them a little. It's good that you can delay them. Qi Ming was slightly relieved. He hurriedly checked, wanting to escape from the siege of the three spirit-swallowing bugs again. Just as Qi Ming was checking, another black line flew quickly and quietly from behind him. Before he could react, it landed on his protective light. Creak! Creak! The spirit-swallowing bugs unceremoniously began to devour Qi Ming's protective golden light, which immediately began to flicker. Damn it! Qi Ming turned pale with fright. He clapped his hands, and a palm-sized scarf flew out from his storage bag. The scarf emitted a pink light, and after absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, it rapidly expanded and covered the spirit-swallowing bugs behind Qi Ming. Creak! A soft sound, which seemed to be made by the spirit-swallowing bugs, was immediately covered by the pink light. Thank goodness! Qi Ming had just heaved a sigh of relief when 4 more black lines flew quickly from elsewhere. Obviously, they were attracted by the pink light. Damn it! How could I forget? Qi Ming almost wanted to slap himself. The spirit-swallowing bugs like the light from the Dharma treasure. I clearly knew that, and I even reminded others. How could I be so foolish? Why did I release the Dharma treasure? One of the spirit-swallowing bugs landed on the Dharma treasure and devoured the light. The other 3 spirit-swallowing bugs rushed toward Qi Ming. Facing 6 spirit-swallowing bugs at once, Qi Ming was very flustered. He cast spells one after another. What made him feel cold was that the spirit-swallowing bug's speed of devouring spells was getting faster and faster. His confinement spell was almost instantly devoured by the spirit-swallowing bugs. I can't care anymore. Qi Ming saw that his scarf was about to be torn apart by 2 spirit-swallowing bugs. He gritted his teeth and rubbed his hands together. The Dharma power in his body surged, and a violent wave of Dharma power was generated from his hands. Kill! Qi Ming shouted and released his hands. With a roar, a bright light overflowed and covered the surrounding dozens of feet. A strong Dharma power rushed toward the 6 spirit-swallowing bugs. Chirp, chirp! The 6 spirit-swallowing bugs cried out loudly as they were sent flying by Qi Ming's attack. They tumbled in the air. However, when the 6 spirit-swallowing bugs stopped in midair, they cried out and rushed toward Qi Ming again. It was as if the spell just now had no effect on them. Moreover, because of the light from Qi Ming's spell, another 3 spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted to him. Qi Ming almost cried. Then, he realized something. It must be Green Peak. What secret skill did he use? Let's go. Qi Ming hurriedly moved his body, wanting to escape. He had only flown 2 feet when the 9 spirit-swallowing bugs surrounded him. Even the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs that had devoured the scarf stuck their heads out of the scarf that had lost its light. They flapped their wings and flew toward Qi Ming. Qi Ming was anxious. He knew better than anyone how powerful the spirit-swallowing bugs were. However, he was the first to encounter so many spirit-swallowing bugs. He took out all kinds of yellow talismans and magic weapons from his storage bag and threw them at the spirit-swallowing bugs one by one, hoping for a miracle. However, none of these magic weapons that could control the spiritual qi of heaven and earth gave Qi Ming any hope. Qi Ming screamed, just as the light around him flashed again and sent the 9 spirit-swallowing bugs flying. 2 of them actually got close to his protective light. They bit through Qi Ming's protective light and crashed into his body. Qi Ming's screams attracted the attention of many Golden Core practitioners who were fighting the spirit-swallowing bugs. They also attracted the attention of many Foundation Establishment practitioners. The 9 spirit-swallowing bugs that had been sent flying by Qi Ming flapped their wings again and rushed toward Qi Ming. One of them was even attracted by the light from his spell and flew toward him. These 10 spirit-swallowing bugs all rushed toward Qi Ming's lower abdomen. His body was like a piece of paper and was easily penetrated by them. Qi Ming writhed madly in the air. He was in so much pain. Explode! Unable to bear the pain, Qi Ming made a spell and wanted to explode himself. However, when he made the spell, no Dharma power was produced in his meridians. The spirit-swallowing bugs had already rushed into his dantian and swallowed his golden core. At this moment, Qi Ming's Dharma power could no longer support the flying spell. His body fell from the sky and landed on the ground of the sword catacomb, a bloody mess. Buzz, from his flesh, the spirit-swallowing bugs that were smaller than before flew out again. They were much faster and flew toward the other Golden Core practitioners. The Foundation establishment and Golden Core practitioners who had witnessed this scene all turned pale. A practitioner in the early stage of the Golden Core realm, who was already famous on the Dawn Rain continent, was killed by a dozen little bugs. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, how could they have believed it? Wong, at this moment, the sword hums that seemed to have subsided earlier once again rang out loudly. Amidst the sword lights of the cultivators several kilometers away, many swordsmen wearing pitch-black sword robes appeared. These swordsmen's heads and faces were all covered. -11. Chapter 2682. These swordsmen stood on the sword lights and flew high into the sky. Their eyes looked at the 160,000 cultivators who were fleeing in panic. They took out a flat object from their bosom and put it in their mouths. Then, they took out a pitch-black bag from their waist and opened it. A bunch of pitch-black flying objects also rushed out from the bag. The flying objects were the size of a fist and were in the shape of a gourd. They looked exactly like the spirit-swallowing bugs. These swordsmen puffed up their cheeks and seemed to be blowing sounds that couldn't be heard by human ears. Along with the sounds, the spirit-swallowing bugs flew in the air, covering the sky and the earth, and rushed toward the cultivators in a dense and overwhelming manner. So many spirit-swallowing bugs? Seeing so many spirit-swallowing bugs flying towards them, the cultivators of the True Path sect were scared out of their wits. They could not care less about their formation. They all covered their heads and ran away, afraid that the spirit-swallowing bugs would target them. Buzz, 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 within a few miles, the sound of the spirit-swallowing bugs spreading their wings could be heard. The entire battlefield was covered. Hold on, hold on. Li Zongbao flew in the air and shouted with all his might. However, the cultivators were already frightened by the spirit-swallowing bugs. How could they hold on? Senior Brother Li, watch out, Xiao Mao shouted. A spirit-swallowing bug flew to Li Zongbao's back and rushed towards him. Although Li Zongbao was shocked, he still waved the immortal piercing whip in his hand and hit the spirit-swallowing bug. Senior Brother, don't use your magic treasure. Fairy Hong Xia was also shocked and shouted hurriedly. However, to their surprise, Li Zongbao's whip hit the spirit-swallowing bug and sent it flying back dozens of feet. It fell from the air and was dead. This doesn't seem to be a spirit-swallowing bug. Xiao Mao was also slightly shocked and hurriedly flew over. When he caught the spirit-swallowing bug with his hand, he saw that this spirit-swallowing bug was very similar to the previous one. However, there was a deep dent on its thumb-sized head. It must have been caused by Li Zongbao's immortal piercing whip. This spirit-swallowing bug. Fairy Hong Xia quickly flew over and took a closer look. She could not tell. Fairy Hong Xia had never seen an earth-devouring bug before. Naturally, she did not know that the earth-devouring bug was no different from the spirit-devouring bug. Humph, of course they are not spirit-swallowing bugs. Li Zongbao's voice came from behind them. If the sky is filled with spirit-swallowing bugs, why would the swordsmen of the Huan Kingdom use so many sword formations? Just this spirit-devouring array alone killed hundreds of thousands of people from my Dao sect. Indeed, Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao raised their heads and looked over. Although most of the spirit-devouring bugs flew towards the true Dao sect disciples, some of them left the group and pounced towards the ground. There was some vegetation on the ground, as well as some gravel. Creaking sounds could be heard as the gravel and vegetation gradually disappeared. Many spirit-swallowing bugs even pounced on some of the fallen celestial devices and magic treasures. However, these spirit-swallowing bugs were different from before. They swallowed the celestial devices bit by bit, and all the celestial devices and magic treasures were damaged. This is not a spirit-swallowing bug, but it is similar to the spirit-swallowing bug. Fairy Hong Xia understood immediately. It must be that the swordsmen of the Huan Kingdom tried to cultivate the spirit-swallowing bugs but failed. Instead, They mutated. Those that devour gravel are probably earth-swallowing bugs. Those that devour vegetation are wood-swallowing bugs. And those that devour celestial devices must be gold-swallowing bugs. That's right. There are also water-swallowing bugs and fire-swallowing bugs. Now they are all here to join in the fun. Let's kill them all. Xiao Mao also shouted. He stretched out his hand and took out the magic treasures that he did not dare to use. However, at this moment, another scream came from afar. Another early golden elixir realm cultivator had his body broken through by the spirit-swallowing bugs and rushed into his body. This swordsman is really cunning, Fairy Hong Xia said angrily. They used hundreds of real spirit-swallowing bugs to kill them and tens of thousands of fake spirit-swallowing bugs as a smokescreen. Between the real and fake, who knows which is real and which is fake? Who cares if they are real or fake? Let's kill them first. Li Zongbao sneered. He waved his immortal-piercing whip and chased after the spirit-swallowing bugs, killing them one by one. However, Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao, and Fairy Hongxia were too weak. They only killed less than 30 fake spirit-swallowing bugs in 10 minutes. The other cultivators were fleeing in panic. Who would notice their actions? Li Zongbao was very familiar with this scream. He hurriedly looked up and saw that Li Jijie of the Changbai sect was covered in blood. Finally, he could not resist the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs, and they rushed into his body. His corpse fell from the sky. Alas, Li Zongbao was silent. He knew that Li Jijie's flying sword was targeted by the spirit-swallowing bugs first. It was already good that he could hold on for so long. Unfortunately, he was a middle golden elixir realm cultivator of the Changbai sect and could not escape from being killed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. Before he died, he did not even have time to use the talisman given by his sect. Li Jijie is dead. Are the other middle golden elixir realm masters far away? Li Zongbao looked around, looking for his master. In the distance, Hung Feng was also entangled by about 10 spirit-swallowing bugs. Hung Feng was afraid of attracting more spirit-swallowing bugs, so he did not dare to use magic. He only dared to move in the air. When he could not dodge, he dared to use his magic power. It seemed that they were of one mind. When Li Zongbao looked up, Hung Feng also turned his head. When he saw Li Zongbao's gaze, he immediately waved his hand and pointed to the west. The meaning was very clear. He wanted Li Zongbao to escape. But how could Li Zongbao leave? He moved his body and was about to fly over with the immortal piercing whip. Hung Feng was furious. He was careless, and a spirit-swallowing bug almost rushed into his protective brilliance. Senior brother Li, Fairy Hong Xia said anxiously, even if you go over, I'm afraid you are no match for him. You will attract the spirit-swallowing bugs for no reason. Li Zongbao wanted to say, if Xiaohua is there, what will you do? However, just as he said those two words, he heard a loud sword hum coming from the eastern horizon. A huge sword like a phoenix appeared in the air. Lu, Ruo, Chang. Li Zongbao said word by word. What killing move does she have now? Fairy Hong Xia's expression changed. At this moment, 3 spirit-swallowing bugs flew towards the 3 of them, in the distance, in the direction that the Dao sect disciples had scattered and wanted to charge towards, which was 2 miles away. The faint smoke and dust was extremely dense. It was as if the smoke and dust that had covered dozens of miles had originated from this place. When Lu Ruochang's huge sword appeared in the air, a blurry figure appeared from the smoke. It was the first person that Lu Ruochang encountered when she entered the 4-square sword formation, Night Rain, who was wearing a black sword formation. Night Rain was the same as before. His entire body was hidden in his sword armor. Only a pair of eyes could see outside. The rest of his body was not exposed. No one knew what he looked like. Lu Ruochang's phoenix sword essence was reflected in his eyes. It was a kind of eagerness. Night Rain stretched out his hand and took out a strange object. This object was like a statue. It was the size of a palm and was dark green. It looked very similar to the palace guarding bug. It had a triangular head, a small body, and a thumb-length tail. However, this object had 5 legs, which was different from the palace guarding bug's 4 legs. On its head, there was only 1 eye. which took up more than 60% of its head. Yu took out the object and began to chant in a low voice. The strange syllables were emitted in an extremely rhythmic manner. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the object actually reacted. Its entire body emitted a faintly discernible green light. This green light had an extremely strong penetrative power. It even clearly illuminated the dense fog around Yu. Seeing that the object was glowing, Night Rain stretched out her thumb and placed it in her mouth. She bit it lightly and blood oozed out from the pad of her thumb. Night Rain raised her thumb and looked at the blood that was slowly flowing out. Her chanting changed again. The sound seemed to have landed on the blood. The blood that oozed out did not coagulate. Instead, it slowly flowed on Night Rain's thumb. Gradually, a blood-red green seal script appeared on the pad of his thumb. This green seal character was so exquisite and so strange. The thick fog around him actually surged with the appearance of the green seal character like boiling water. A small character could actually have such power. If others were here, they would definitely be shocked. However, Night Rain seemed to be used to this. His eyes were abnormally calm, without any ripples. Poof! Seeing that the green seal character was formed and was about to fly out of his hand, Night Rain did not hesitate to open his mouth and spit a mouthful of essence blood on it. Night Rain's essence blood was originally a cluster, and the green seal character was extremely small. However, when the essence blood rushed out, the green seal character flashed a faint green light. All the essence blood landed on it. Even a faint shadow fell with the essence blood. As the green light flashed, it was pulled out of Night Rain's mouth. Moo! It sounded like the moo of a cow. Just as the shadow fell into the green seal text, the green seal text suddenly made a sound. Night Rain's hand trembled slightly. It was as if the character suddenly became much heavier. Go! Night Rain did not dare to delay. His eyes were filled with anxiety. He flipped his hand and pressed his thumb on the object in the shape of the Palace Guardian bug with great difficulty. The green seal character formed by the blood landed on the object's eye. Whoosh! As the green seal character landed on the object's eye, the Palace Guardian bug's eye suddenly opened. A cruel, bloody, and merciless green light swept out and rushed into the fog. Night Rain's face was extremely pale. His body was also trembling. As the Palace Guardian bug opened its eye, a green light appeared on its body. The Palace Guardian bug slowly floated in the air. -11. Chapter 2683. Phew! Night Rain let out a long breath again. Then, she waved her hand, and several faint green lights shot out, hitting the air about 100 feet away. The thick fog was slowly lifted as the green lights hit it, as if a layer of gauze was being removed. Under the thin veil, there were 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples. These 4 groups of sword cultivator disciples were all dressed in different sword attire. They were scattered near Yu, and each group had over 10,000 people. They surrounded Yu. Fellow swordsman Knight. After the thick fog was lifted, a first-grade illusory swordsman standing in front of each group saw Night Rain. He hurriedly flew up and bowed, saying, "It's time for us to contribute to the sword realm, isn't it?" "That's right." Night Rain nodded slightly, but her voice was weak. She said lightly, "Fellow Taoist from the Sword School of Sword Mountain, the Pingli Sword School, the Flowing Wind Sword Village, and the Flying Thunder Sword Sect. You've been lying in ambush here for nearly 5 years, so you're very familiar with the cooperation of this sword formation. Now LVGNU has sent a signal, and hundreds of thousands of practitioners from the Taoist sect have fallen into the spirit-devouring formation. Needless to say, the Gold Core practitioners in the formation have been attacked by the spirit-devouring bugs, so they have no time to take care of the Foundation establishment and Chi refining disciples. Those disciples have been confused by LVGNU's deceptive tactic and have been utterly defeated. Now is the time for us to contribute to the sword realm." The leaders of the 4 sword school were 2 men and 2 women. Hearing Night Rain's words, they were excited. Ji Ping, a gray-haired swordsman, bowed and said, "The Sword School of Sword Mountain is a small sect in the sword realm. Under the leadership of fellow swordsman Night Rain, we're able to come out for the sword realm and make such a great contribution. On behalf of more than 10,000 disciples of the Sword School of Sword Mountain, I'd like to thank fellow swordsman Night Rain. If fellow swordsman Night Rain needs any help in the future, we'll do anything for you. That's right, Limoji of the Pingli Sword School, a middle-aged swordswoman, also smiled and said, according to LV Jianyu, it's because of fellow swordsman Night Rain that we have the opportunity to contribute to the sword realm. We're all very grateful to fellow swordsman Night Rain. Haha, it's fine. We are all disciples of the sword domain. If we can do something for the sword domain, so what if we die? Yu said with a faint smile. Flowing Wind Sword Manor's Fan Ping became even more charming. She smiled and said, it's a pity that we've been training with sword friend Night Rain for 5 years, but we've never seen his true face. It's really a pity. There will be opportunities in the future. Our 4 sects only need to remember Night Rain's sword friend's kindness. Flying Thunder Sword Sect's Huang Xing was a tall old man. His voice was also extremely loud. Hee, my grace. You will naturally know in the future. Yi Yu's voice grew louder and louder. He waved his hand and said, now, my 4 friends, get ready. Tell your disciples to follow the previous formation and prepare to activate the sword origin. Okay. The 4 of them shouted in unison. They were all abnormally excited. Yes, they were able to participate in the ambush of the 4 directions sword formation with the help of the sword formation. They did not need to fight the Taoist cultivators head-on. This was simply a naked military merit. Needless to say, the Yin-Yang sword formation and the 5 elements sword formation, the disciples of the Kuan sword sect and the Taihe sword sect practiced the Yin-Yang flying sword. They were the best choice to set up the Yin-Yang sword formation. The 3 sword sect and the Cauldron sword sect could also gather the 5 elements flying sword. However, in the sword domain, how could these 2 sects be the only ones who could gather the 5 elements flying sword? The reason why the 2 sword sects were included in the 4 directions sword formation was that they had a good relationship with the Black Phoenix sword sect. As for the Duanshui Villa in the Spirit Devouring formation, they were LV Ruochang's own subordinates. Everyone knew that the last formation was to deal with the cultivators who had escaped from the Spirit Devouring formation. Many swordsmen did not believe that those gold core cultivators could escape from the siege of thousands of spirit-devouring bugs. The last formation would definitely kill the most enemies among the 4 sword formations, which meant that it would have the greatest military merit. The masters of the 4 sects had never thought that such a good job would fall on them. After all, they were already the second-rate sword sects in the sword domain, even though they had once been glorious. However, because of the arrangement of this mysterious Yi Yu, the 4 sword sects were selected. The masters of the 4 sects were overjoyed and immediately sent out tens of thousands of elites to cooperate with Yi Yu's arrangement. They trained for 5 years. For such a reason, how could Ji Ping and the others not be grateful to Yi Yu? These words were really from the bottom of their hearts. When they heard Night Rain's orders, the 4 of them shouted loudly and flew into the air above their respective sword faction disciples. With a wave of their hands, sword beams shot into the sky. The nearly 40,000 disciples emitted a faint sword beam as their figures gradually moved. It seemed to be an extremely mysterious trajectory. The 40,000 disciples guarded the surroundings of Night Rain, and each disciple moved within a certain range. 10 disciples formed a group and formed a trajectory. 100 disciples, 1,000 disciples, and even 10,000 disciples from each sect formed a trajectory. The 40,000 disciples moved around Yi Yu at the same time. As the entire formation rotated, a strange suction force appeared above each disciple's head. Yi Yu's eyes flashed with intense passion. He pointed at the Palace Guardian insect that stopped in the air. The Palace Guardian insect's body shone brightly, and it strangely moved in the air like a real Palace Guardian insect. Seeing the Palace Guardian insect crawl to the top of Yi Yu's head, Yi Yu suddenly raised his head and opened his mouth. A faint green light shot into the air like a sharp sword and rushed into the Palace Guardian insect's body. Gee, the Palace Guardian insect cried out in alarm. Its one eye shot out tens of thousands of green light beams into the sky like a fountain. Then, it scattered back down. The place where the green light landed was where the suction force came from. It was the top of each disciple's head. Kill! Yi Yu roared. The The sword light around the 40,000 disciples flashed. The sword origin in their bodies was ready to come out. However, just as the sword origin was about to leave him, the green light beams immediately penetrated the disciples' heads. Every disciple's body was immediately covered by a layer of green light. The sword origin was immediately imprisoned in the disciples' bodies. Pong, pong, pong. A series of light explosions rang out continuously, lasting for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Every light explosion was a disciple's sword origin surging and his body exploding. After every light explosion, the green light entered his flesh and merged with his sword origin. Sword friendy. What is going on? Ji Ping and the others were shocked and hurriedly shouted. Ha ha ha. Yu raised his head and laughed happily. He said, "Didn't you all want to contribute to Sword Realm? Weren't you all not afraid of being crushed? Now is the time for you all to sacrifice your lives for Sword Realm." But, Ji Ping was at a loss for words. He didn't know how to ask. "You? Who are you? Why do you have to choose our 4 sword sects?" Limoji and Fan Ping, the 2 swordsmen, were the most meticulous. They almost shouted in unison. At this moment, Ji Ping and the others suddenly understood that the 4th sword formation of the 4-sword formation was definitely not an ordinary sword formation. It was definitely an extremely sinister sword formation. Looking at the stance of their disciples, it was most likely a sinister sword formation that would exchange their lives for theirs. It was Yu, a mysterious person that they had never seen before, who sent the 40,000 disciples of the 4 sects into this pit of fire. However, why would this mysterious Yu treat the disciples of the 4 sects like this? Could it be that the 4 sects also had a grudge against him? In the blink of an eye, Ji Ping and the others had racked their brains countless times. It was as if they had racked their brains, but still couldn't find a swordsman who had such a deep grudge against their sword sect. Ha ha ha, didn't you all say that you wanted to see my true appearance? Yu laughed loudly. He stretched out his hand and pulled down his sword armor. He said, "I will now fulfill your last wish." Under the sword armor was an extremely handsome man. His eyebrows were sword-like and his nose was like a hanging gallbladder. He didn't seem to have any special features. Ji Ping and the others looked at him again and again. They couldn't remember anything at all. They couldn't help but smile bitterly at each other. "What? Can't you see who I am?" Yi Yu's eyes were filled with eagerness. His tone was much more cheerful than before. Ji Ping and the others smiled bitterly and then sneered. "I don't care what grudges you have with our 4 sections. However, you used the excuse of setting up the sword formation to avenge your personal grudge. You are the one that we hate the most in the battle of Sword Domain. Today, we will fight to the death with you. We don't believe that the 4 illusory swordsmen can't escape from your hands. When we have a chance to live, we will find Lu Ruochang and Lu Jianyu and ask her to uphold justice for us." Ha ha ha. Seeing that the 4 illusory swordsmen were overflowing with sword light, the flying swords in their bodies were about to fly out. Yi Yu gently pointed his hand. For green rays of light fell from the top of the 4 people's heads. The green threads that were connected to their heads trembled rapidly. The 4 people's bodies were completely imprisoned by the green light, unable to move at all. "Lu Jianyu? Are you still fantasizing about finding Lu Ruochang? How can this Yi let you all return alive?" Yi Yu said cheerfully. "Besides, even if you survive, even if people suspect that more than 40,000 people from your 4 sects died, will Lu Ruochang blame me?" "What?" Ji Ping and the others struggled with all their might. However, their sword origin was completely imprisoned by the green light. They couldn't move at all. They couldn't help but despair in their hearts. When they heard Yi Yu's words, they were immediately shocked. The feeling of being toyed with filled their hearts uncontrollably. You have colluded with Lu Ruochang?" Fan Ping couldn't help but cry out. "What do you mean by colluding?" Yi Yu sneered. "This is the promise that Lu Jianyu gave me. It is also the price for me to kill hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators, using 40,000 disciples of your 4-sword sect to exchange for the lives of hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators. Don't you think it's an extremely good deal?" -11. Chapter 2684. Shut up, Huang Xing said angrily. Since you think it's worth it, why don't you let your sword's gate come here to die? Yi Yu's face twitched slightly, but there was a trace of reluctance in his eyes. He said faintly, yes, you all said that you could give up your lives for the sword domain. But now that it's come to this, you all go back on your words. We'd rather do that, but we don't want to die in your hands for no reason. Huang Xing shouted. However, Yi Yu ignored him and only muttered, as long as you're a human, regardless of whether you're a cultivator or a swordsman, you all have the desire to live. However, some people don't want this chance to live and choose death for the sake of others. But what about the others? They're not grateful to these people, and after making use of them, they wantonly killed their descendants. The heavenly Tao is fair. You, what are you talking about? Limoji saw Yi Yu's crazy look and was very scared. He said anxiously, 40,000 of our Sword's Gate disciples have already fallen. Do you still want to live? Yi Yu looked up at the four of them and sneered. Not just you. The foundations of your Sword's Gate in the Sword Domain. After the battle here, I'll kill you all. This is something that LV Ruochang has already agreed to. Only by completely wiping out all four of your clans will I be able to reveal my true face in broad daylight. You, who are you? Why do you have such a deep hatred for our Sword's Gate? Ji Ping's face twitched. Before death, the desire to know the answer was incomparably huge. Didn't you just say it? You want my Sword's Gate to come here to die. Yi Yu said faintly, my Sword's Gate has already done it 8,000 years ago. 8,000 years? Ji Ping was stunned, as if he couldn't remember anything. You're a remnant of the Flying Dragon Sword Gate? Huang Xing suddenly remembered something and exclaimed, ha ha ha, not bad. There's actually someone who knows about my Flying Dragon Sword Gate. Yi Yu waved his hand, and an orange-yellow sword light soared into the sky. With a roar, a dragon-shaped sword intent flashed out from the sword light, and an enormous and indescribable aura spread out from the dragon-shaped sword, enveloping an area of several hundred feet. Flying Dragon Sword Sect, it really is the Flying Dragon Sword Sect. Ji Ping muttered in a daze. That's right. Since you know that I am a disciple of the Flying Dragon Sword Sect, you should know why I am here, right? Yi Yu said coldly, 8,000 years ago. Your four sects took advantage of the fact that my Flying Dragon Sword Sect's vitality was greatly damaged to invade my dragon platform and exterminate my descendants. Tell me, should I not take revenge today? Sword friend Yi, Huang Xing said helplessly, that was 8,000 years ago. What does it have to do with us? It's better to squash enmity than to keep it alive. You've killed tens of thousands of disciples from our four sects, so you should have avenged your Flying Dragon Sword Sect, right? The four of us don't plan on going back alive. The other disciples of our four sects are even more innocent. Thousands of years ago, the disciples of my Flying Dragon Sword Sect who were stationed at the dragon platform were not innocent? When your four sects annihilated my Flying Dragon Sword Sect that day, did you ever consider that you were innocent? Yi Yu said coldly, now, you're just complaining. How can you be innocent? Furthermore, the Sword Region Dragon platform belongs to my Flying Dragon Sword Sect. You've occupied it for thousands of years. Shouldn't you leave? Shouldn't you pay the price? Yi Yu lifted his eyes to look towards the east as he spoke. The sounds of fighting were already faintly discernible. He snorted from his nose and said, this Yi is too lazy to say anything more to all of you. This Yi is only telling all of you this because all of you have been so respectful towards this Yi over the past 5 years. All of you should hurry over. The credit of killing hundreds of thousands of Tao sect disciples is waiting for this Yi to share with everyone. Following that, Yi raised his hand and the four of them were surrounded by a green light. The four of them didn't even have time to make a sound before they turned into bloodstains. These 4 bloodstains were the same as the other 40,000 bloodstains. Although they no longer had any vitality, they were still spinning like before. Rise! Yi Yu roared. He opened his mouth and a faint green light was shot at the palace guarding bug. The palace guarding bug moved slightly, and the tens of thousands of green threads trembled at the same time. Phantoms emerged from the bloodstains. They were the vengeful spirits of the 40,000 swordsmen from the four sects. Once these vengeful spirits were drawn out, a vicious aura immediately rushed out. This vicious aura gathered together and even dispersed the thick fog. Ha ha ha, Yu laughed. He pointed his hand, and the tens of thousands of green threads flew out and landed on the tens of thousands of blood stains. The blood stains boiled and countless bubbles emerged from the blood stains. Streaks of bloody light followed the green threads and rushed into the palace guarding bug. The blood stains quickly shrank. Soon, all of the blood stains disappeared. The palace guarding bug became half the size of a person, and its body emitted a red and dark green light. Squeak. The palace guarding bug raised its head and made a sound. The sound was not right, but the invisible wave spread far away. As the wave swept across, the vengeful spirits slowly rushed out from the ground of the sword tomb one after another. Go! Yu flew up and landed on the palace guarding insect's body. The palace guarding insect carried Yu and quickly crawled through the air. Tens of thousands of vengeful spirits surged toward the east like a tide, which was where the Dao sect cultivators were charging from. Within a radius of several miles around Yu, even more vengeful spirits surged forth like a thin tide and gathered toward the battlefield. On the battlefield, 3 spirit-swallowing bugs quietly turned into 3 black lines and rushed to the left of Li Zongbao and the others. Li Zongbao and the others had already noticed it. Humph! Li Zongbao sneered. He waved his hand, and the immortal piercing whip hit the spirit-swallowing bugs again. But something unexpected happened. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were not knocked away like before. Instead, they opened their mouths and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip and started to chew it. Spirit-swallowing bugs. Li Zongbao was shocked. He hurriedly activated his Dharma power, and the light of the immortal piercing whip shone brightly. He wanted to knock the spirit-swallowing bugs away. But as soon as he moved, the 2 spirit-swallowing bugs that were flying toward Xiao Mao and Fairy Hong Xia were immediately attracted by the light of the immortal piercing whip and rushed toward Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao hurriedly activated his flying skill to escape, but he was not as fast as the spirit-swallowing bugs. In a moment, 2 spirit-swallowing bugs caught up with him and bit the light of the immortal piercing whip. What should I do now? Li Zongbao had always treated the immortal piercing whip as his treasure. When he saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs devouring the light of the whip, he knew that in a moment, his whip would be turned into ordinary iron like Li Jijie's flying sword. He was extremely anxious. At this time, Fairy Hong Xia and Xiao Mao also flew over. Although they did not dare to get too close, they were not too far away. But they were helpless when they saw the 3 spirit-swallowing bugs. Should we use the congenital primordial water? Fairy Hong Xia hesitated and gritted her teeth. However, the congenital primordial water was activated by the Ice Phoenix celestial body. Although the celestial body did not need to be released, the fluctuation of the celestial body, was it spiritual energy? Fairy Hong Xia could not be sure. Moreover, the celestial body was more than 100 feet long. It was far more attractive to the spirit-swallowing bugs than ordinary cultivators. Fairy Hong Xia was afraid that she would become the target of the spirit-swallowing bugs the moment she released the Ice Phoenix celestial body. The consequences would be worse than Li Zongbao losing the immortal piercing whip. Attack. Li Zongbao helplessly used his Dharma incantation, such as the fireball skill and the confinement skill, one after another. Unfortunately, none of them were effective. The light of the immortal piercing whip gradually disappeared in the mouths of the spirit-swallowing bugs. Forget it. Li Zongbao shook his hand and was about to throw away the immortal piercing whip. But at this time, the spirit-swallowing bugs flew up again and headed for Li Zongbao's arm. Obviously, they had followed the trajectory of Li Zongbao's Dharma power. Oh no! Li Zongbao also saw Qiming and Li Jijie being killed. How could he not know the power of the spirit-swallowing bugs? He hurriedly flew up. Just as before, Li Zongbao had only flown a few feet when the spirit-swallowing bugs were already behind him. Li Zongbao trembled with fear and could only activate the Dharma power in his body, regardless of whether it would attract more spirit-swallowing bugs. At this critical moment, there was a loud buzzing sound. In the sky, About 1,000 feet behind Hong Hong, a faint light flashed. Dozens of strong hurricanes appeared, and a huge palm gradually formed. It was unknown which middle-stage gold core cultivator could not resist the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs and could not help but use the talisman given by his sect. The hand of the nascent soul had already been activated. The powerful confinement skill firmly held the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs surrounding the cultivator. However, many of the spirit-swallowing bugs around the cultivator were attracted by the spiritual power of the talisman. They abandoned their targets and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul. The 3 spirit-swallowing bugs on Li Zongbao's back were also attracted by the talisman. They turned their heads and flew toward the hand of the nascent soul, ignoring Li Zongbao. I was lucky. Li Zongbao's back was sweating. He could not help but whisper. He lowered his head and looked at the immortal piercing whip in his hand, which had lost its brilliance. He regretfully and reluctantly put it into his storage bag. Oh no, it's Uncle Liang Mingfu from the Nanming sect. Fairy Hong Xia's eyes were sharp. She had already seen the gold core cultivator using the hand of the nascent soul. She could not help but cry out. Sure enough, Liang Mingfu made an incantation. The hand of the nascent soul clenched fiercely. When the hand opened, the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs that were caught fell from the sky. However, after falling for a few feet, 2 or 3 of them flapped their wings and flew up again. The other 10 spirit-swallowing bugs fell with the wind and did not fly up again. Seeing this, Liang Mingfu's face lit up. However, his joy only flashed for a moment before it froze on his face. Within 100 feet, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted by the spiritual chi of the nascent soul's talisman. They flew toward the hand. -11. Chapter 2685. Damn it! Liang Mingfu shouted and was about to cast another spell. But at this time, the dozens of black lines had flown to the big hand, and dozens of black spots appeared on the big hand like spots. Seal. Liang Mingfu dared not hesitate. His Dharma power surged, and the big hand emitted a faint light again, driving all the spirit-swallowing bugs away from the big hand. When Liang Mingfu was about to control the big hand to catch the spirit-swallowing bugs, they opened their sharp teeth again and started to chew the light of the Yuan Ying's hand. You're courting death. Liang Mingfu snorted and slowly grabbed the spirit-swallowing bugs with his big hand again. Uncle Liang, watch out! Li Zongbao's voice was very loud. Oh? Liang Mingfu was in danger and hurriedly released his divine thought. Sure enough, just behind him, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs scattered and flew towards him. At this time, they were less than 3 feet away from him. How can these spirit-swallowing bugs be so cunning? Liang Mingfu was shocked. He moved quickly and the Yuan Ying's hand smashed towards the spirit-swallowing bugs again. Buzz! The spirit-swallowing bugs were almost unable to move under the restriction of the Yuan Ying's hand. Suddenly, the big hand made a deafening sound. Damn it! Liang Mingfu heard it, and his face changed greatly. Before he could do anything, boom, with another loud sound. The Yuan Ying's hand suddenly collapsed in the air and turned into a broken talisman again, falling slowly. The spirit-swallowing bugs that had swallowed the Yuan Ying's hand swarmed towards Liang Mingfu like a swarm of bees. Run! Liang Mingfu only had one thought in his mind, and his body suddenly swayed. Pa! Just as Liang Mingfu flew several meters away, a spirit-swallowing bug strangely rushed towards him from the side. Liang Mingfu waved his hand, and 2 more spirit-swallowing bugs appeared on his left side. Liang Mingfu's heart sank. When he just raised his other hand, buzz, as if thousands of bees were dancing around his ears, Liang Mingfu was very anxious. He scanned with his divine thought, and his face turned pale. He saw that the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs had already landed on his back and were devouring his protective golden light. Oh no! Without hesitation, Liang Mingfu made a prompt decision to cast an incantation before the protective golden light was extinguished. Boom! With a loud bang, the space within a radius of hundreds of feet shook violently. Countless airwaves rushed in all directions from here. and the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were also pushed more than 1,000 feet away. That was not all. Within 100 zhang of Liang Mingfu, there were several Golden Core cultivators and quite a few Foundation Establishment disciples. The Golden Core cultivators were still able to escape in a panic, but the Foundation Establishment disciples were miserable. Although they tried their best to escape, they were still unable to escape the impact of the Golden Core explosion. Most of them died. The pitiful thing was that instead of dying in the mouth of the spirit-swallowing bugs, they were dragged to the grave by their own teachers. For a moment, the area within 1,000 feet of where Liang Mingfu had exploded was completely empty. How terrifying! Xiao Mao exclaimed in shock when he saw how powerful Liang Mingfu's self-destruction was. Li Zongbao, Fairy Hongxia, and Xiao Mao were originally quite a distance away from Liang Mingfu. After Liang Mingfu flew in the opposite direction, they were at the edge of the 1,000 feet radius. When Liang Mingfu self-destructed, they hurriedly dodged and did not suffer much damage. That's amazing. Unlike Xiao Mao, Fairy Hongxia saw that after Liang Mingfu's self-destruction, only half of the spirit-swallowing bugs fell to the air. The other half flapped their wings again and rushed toward the nearby Golden Core cultivators. Master, Li Zongbao was shocked again. Heng Zhao was very close to Liang Mingfu, so he was the first to bear the brunt of the self-destruction. When he hurriedly dodged, more spirit-swallowing bugs were pushed to his side by the airwaves. Unfortunately, this wasn't the most important thing. Right at this moment, countless sword cries resounded from beneath the cultivators, and tens of thousands of enormous, flying swords charged straight out from the ground. Sword light flickered, and sword chi crisscrossed. It was precisely the swordsman that Lu Ruochong had hidden within the spirit-devouring grand formation that had attacked at the same time. Previously, only the spirit-swallowing bugs were wreaking havoc in the soul-devouring formation. Under the control of Fan Kuei-Yuan's pagoda, their main targets were the cultivators at the Golden Core stage. The Foundation Establishment and Qi Refining disciples were only disturbed by the so-called gold-swallowing bugs and earth-swallowing bugs. Of course, many disciples were killed by the real spirit-swallowing bugs, and their corpses were everywhere. Now, the sword formation showed its sharp teeth again. Its target was the Foundation Establishment disciples who had lost their fighting spirit. Li Zongbao wanted to help his master, but the huge sword was condensed by many sword lights. Obviously, it was the joint attack of a group of sword cultivators. How could Li Zongbao be distracted? He hurriedly clapped his hands and habitually took out the immortal piercing whip. However, the immortal piercing whip had been destroyed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. How could it be useful? Li Zongbao sighed and hurriedly looked for other magic weapons. Fortunately, Xiao Mao and Fairy Hongxia were beside him. The two of them temporarily protected Li Zongbao. The huge sword of the soul-devouring formation was born. As the sword chi surged, hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted to it. However, in the sky, the fluctuations of the pagoda suddenly intensified. The spirit-swallowing bugs only hesitated for a moment before they rushed towards the Golden Core stage cultivators again. Now, there were less than 160,000 Dao sect cultivators left. They had long been reduced to mere chickens and pottery dogs. There was no way they could form an army. During the first two battles, they could still form simple formations to fight against the giant sword. Now, they could only rely on their instincts to flee in all directions. Many disciples had even died at the hands of other cultivators. For a moment, screams rang out everywhere. In the flashing sword lights, it was like purgatory. Not only that, under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs, more and more Golden Core stage cultivators used their final killing moves. One by one, protective talismans were used. Although these nascent soul stage cultivators could kill some of the spirit-swallowing bugs, once they used their talismans, they attracted more spirit-swallowing bugs. It was tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst. In just a short time, more than 10 Golden Core stage cultivators died. Among them, there were several Golden Core stage elders in the conference hall. Ko Xiangling of the Yongyi sect, Zhu Junwei of the Cool Breeze Valley, Yuan Yiguang of the Blue Li sect, and Qing Ziyi of the Imosang Mountain were all cultivators in the early stage of Golden Core stage. They had been injured outside the sword tomb. Although they had recuperated for a while, how could they protect themselves under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs? One by one, the spirit-swallowing bugs rushed into their bodies and swallowed their golden cores. Huaping from the blazing fire mountain was proficient in the art of controlling fire. Wisps of flame flew to the left and right from time to time, luring the spirit-swallowing bugs to fly to the left and right. At the same time, she also wandered on the edge of the cliff of death. Huang Feng from the exotic beast sect was also strange. He had a strange beast that looked like a green snake coiled around his finger. From time to time, he would make a sharp hissing sound from his mouth, which made the besieging spirit-swallowing bugs a little afraid of him. However, these cultivators in the early stage of Golden Core stage were just on the verge of death. They would die if they didn't do anything. Hung Ming and other cultivators in the middle stage of Golden Core stage were still trying their best to hold on. When they heard the sound of self-explosion from time to time, they felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that the Taoism sect cultivators were really defeated in this battle. However, they still had a little hope in their hearts. They wanted to find a chance to escape from this spirit-swallowing formation. Woo, like a gust of cold wind, a chill appeared on Hung Ming's face. Oh! Hung Ming was slightly stunned. He was a cultivator in the Golden Core stage. Usually, he was immune to cold and heat. How could he feel the cold wind at will? Not to mention that he was fighting hard against the spirit-swallowing bugs. Hung Ming couldn't help looking around. When he looked around, he felt a chill in his heart. As far as the eye could see, there was a flash of sword light. Outside the sword light, there was a thick fog. Within the fog, wisps of dark green were faintly discernible. At the same time, there were strange cries of ghosts and howls of wolves coming from within the fog. Obviously, the fog had been there for a long time, but Hung Ming didn't notice it. All the disciples in the Foundation establishment stage and the Qi refining stage who had escaped earlier were forced back by the fog. Although these disciples activated their flying talismans and flying skills, it was obvious that their Dharma power had been exhausted. From time to time, some disciples were infected by the fog. However, those who were sprayed by the fog all fell from the sky without making a sound and no longer moved. Hiss! Hung Ming really sucked in a breath of cold air. His heart was cold and an unparalleled sense of despair rose in his heart. LV Ruochang had really put in a lot of effort in this square sword formation. He had used all his methods. The yin-yang sword formation killed cultivators in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment stage and below. The five-element sword formation killed cultivators in the Golden Core stage and above, and the spirit-swallowing bugs killed cultivators in the Golden Core stage and above. As for the remaining cultivators, they were killed by this mysterious fog. From the moment the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators fell into the square sword formation, their fates had already been decided by the swordsmen of the Han Kingdom. LV Ruochang would not let a single cultivator fly out of this sword formation, no matter if it was Qi refining, Foundation establishment, or Golden Core. There are dozens of sects in the Dao sect. Why are there no senior brothers in the later stage of the Golden Core stage participating in this battle? At this moment, Hung Ming suddenly thought of LV Ruochang's question. Could it be that the Dao sect is bound to lose in this battle of Dao cultivators? Do the teachers of each sect already know? Or is there another reason? Hung Ming naturally did not have an answer to this question. Looking at the fog flashing with green light, Hung Ming had already lost the courage to fight. He also did not have the strength to resist the attacks of dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs. Even if a senior brother in the later stage of the Golden Core stage came, he would not have a second chance of survival. At this moment, in the thick fog, a green shadow gradually became clear. It was the palace guarding bug, which had already become 10 feet long. This palace guarding bug's body was strangely distorted, and the green light was flickering rapidly. On the palace guarding bug's back, Night Rain, who was dressed in black, gradually appeared. -11. Chapter 2686. Soul Armament. Hong Feng's body trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the beetle. Ever since he took charge of the council hall, He had read up on many of the previous battles in the council hall. He had even read up on some of the information and records from Sky Patrol City. Thus, he had some understanding of the situation in the Huan Kingdom. Now that he saw the green glow of the beetle, which was as agile as a spirit beast, how could he not know that it was a soul armament? Lu Ruochang has gone mad. In order to win this war, he actually lured soul cultivators into the Huan Kingdom. Hung Ji turned pale with fright, but when he saw Yi Yu's true face, he was a bit surprised. This soul warrior seems to be different from what is recorded in the ancient records. Master, Li Zongbao's voice sounded distant. Hung Feng was startled again. When he looked again, a spirit-devouring bug had already climbed onto his protective golden light. Forget it. Everything is about to end. Hung Ju raised his head and looked over. Li Zongbao, Fairy Hong Xia, and the rest were trying their best to resist the sword light. Seeing his proud disciple like this, Hung Ju felt gratified. Perhaps this kind of life is what Zongbao should have. But I won't be able to see it. Seeing a spirit-devouring bug bite through Hong Feng's protective golden light without any resistance, Li Zongbao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. At this critical moment, when all the Dao sect cultivators were about to be wiped out, an indescribable pressure surged from the west of the sword formation like a rising tide. This pressure was very weak in the eyes of Hong Ming and the rest, but it was simple, tenacious, and peculiar. This pressure was like a rising tide, instantly enveloping the great spirit-devouring formation and even surging toward the east. Following which, a huge sealing force descended from the sky, completely enveloping the entire four-direction sword array. This sealing force was so strong that all the cultivators, swordsmen, and even the spirit-devouring bugs stopped in their tracks. Someone is condensing their core. When Hongju felt this pressure, he immediately knew that it was the pressure of a golden core cultivator. Just like Yutong, when the sealing force appeared, Hongjiu also understood that it was the celestial phenomenon of a cultivator's breakthrough. What a pity! Hong Feng felt a trace of regret. This late-stage foundation establishment disciple is not condensing his core at the right time. If it was a few days earlier, he would have succeeded. Now that he's condensing his core here, there are spirit-devouring bugs, swordsmen, and even soul warriors. How could he succeed? However, the power of imprisonment was not what Hung Zhao had imagined. It grew stronger and stronger, and everyone was trapped in it, especially those spirit-swallowing bugs. They were tightly confined and could not move at all. Like Yutong, Hung Feng's heart was in turmoil. He was a middle-stage golden core disciple of the Utopia faction, so he was very clear about the details of a late-stage golden core cultivator's pregnancy. He knew better than Yutong about the signs of a late-stage golden core cultivator's pregnancy. This sealing force could only be produced by a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator's pregnancy. It was absolutely impossible for a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator to condense his core. Which senior brother is actually in the sword catacomb? Hung Feng was almost stunned. No cultivator, no matter if it was the state of Shi, the state of Meng, or the state of Lian, with any common sense, would conceive a baby in the sword catacomb. However, Hung Feng was only stunned for a moment. Then, a thought of escaping from death appeared in his mind. His previously dead vitality sprouted like a bud. Hung Feng knew that in the early years, the Taoism sect cultivators who were trapped in the sword formation relied on several late-stage golden core cultivators to conceive a baby. From there, they won a chance of survival and defeated the swordsmen who were already confident of victory. Now, wasn't this the Taoism sect cultivators repeating the same trick? Wasn't this the best opportunity for them to kill the spirit-swallowing bugs and escape? Almost without thinking, Hung Feng reached out his hand and took out the nascent soul talisman with difficulty from his storage bag. Then, he activated the Dharma power in his body with difficulty. Buzz, with a flash of brilliance, the nascent soul hand slowly expanded. In this confinement that was comparable to that of a pregnant baby, the nascent soul hand could still be activated. Since Hung Feng had such a thought, De Sun, Shtong Huasong, and the others naturally had the same idea. All the golden core cultivators in the conference hall who had talismans activated their nascent soul hands. Although there were hundreds or even thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, they were different from the golden core cultivators in this confinement phenomenon. They trembled very much, as if they were extremely afraid. The fluctuations of the pagoda in the sky were also disturbed by this confinement force. The spirit-swallowing bugs were no longer under control. They froze in midair, and the nascent soul hands grabbed them and crushed them to death. Damn it! What? Why is it a pregnant baby again? Outside the spirit-swallowing formation, LV Ruochang and the others were also affected by this confinement force. Their expressions changed greatly. LV Ruochang almost stomped his feet in midair and said hatefully, Which golden core cultivator is pregnant? Among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the Taoist sect, there is no disciple in the later stage of golden core, right? Seeing that the confinement force was getting stronger, LV Ruochang was so angry that his whole body trembled. Boom! A huge explosion came from the spirit-swallowing formation in the distance. A burst of yellow brilliance shot up into the sky and shook the confinement force. Fan Mingyuan, Fan Jianyu. LV Ruochang saw this and his expression changed again. Inside the spirit-devouring formation, yellow light soared into the sky, and the area within a radius of several thousand feet was hit by a powerful wave of air. The restrictive force inside the formation was shattered by the explosion of the pagoda that Fan Kuei-Yuan had turned into. The remaining hundreds of spirit-devouring bugs once again had blood-red light in their eyes, and they madly charged toward the nascent soul hands of Hung Feng and the others. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were even more powerful. In a moment, the nascent soul hands were devoured. The hope that the Taoist sect cultivators had just had was snuffed out again. Fan Jianyu. LV Ruochang looked up at the sky and said sorrowfully, The warriors of the sword region will never forget your contributions. Then, he urged the sword light under his feet to fly slowly in the confinement force. He said coldly, Even if there is a golden core cultivator in the later stage of golden core, so what? Not to mention this spirit-swallowing formation, even my final killing move is not something that a pregnant Tianzhao can defeat. However, before LV Ruochang could fly more than 10 feet, strong hurricanes were set off in the space enveloped by the confinement force. The center of these hurricanes was a small virtual point. As these hurricanes grew stronger, the virtual point gradually revealed a shiny silver-white light spot. Once this light spot appeared, it immediately condensed and grew larger. In a moment, it grew to the size of a thumb, then a fist, and finally a dipper. This dipper was surrounded by a huge whirlpool. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the whirlpool was constantly gathering, forming many pearls. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the entire square sword formation was swept away and turned into these crystals. For a moment, the radiance of the magic tools and magic treasures on the battlefield dimmed, and the sword light gradually disappeared. Some cultivators who had exhausted their magic power couldn't even stand steadily in the air, and actually fell from the sky. Of course, this situation only stagnated for a moment. Gusts of wind swept up in the formation again. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth and sword chi in other parts of the sword tomb surged toward the formation again. LV Ruochang was stunned. Hung Tang was even more stunned. But while Hung Tang was stunned, he was also pleasantly surprised. This was because the spirit-swallowing bugs attacking the nascent soul hands were obviously attracted by the vast amount of golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth. They did not care about the hands of the nascent soul and the golden core cultivators. Thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, whether real or fake, rushed toward the huge crystal. The spirit-swallowing formation was no longer effective. This does not seem to be a pregnant senior brother at the peak of the later stage of golden core. A pregnant senior brother shouldn't have crystals. Hong Tang almost stretched out a hand from his throat. Only pure spirit tide can form a nascent soul, right? But if it is not a pregnant senior brother, how can there be such a huge crystal? Perhaps this senior brother's nascent soul is different from that of ordinary cultivators? This could only be Hung Tung's guess. Quick! After LV Ruochang recovered from his shock, he did not have time to care about the abnormality of the pregnant senior brother. He cried out to the group of third-grade illusory swordsmen, "Let's hurry and find the location of this senior brother's nascent soul before he is pregnant. From the looks of it, he is not far away. Maybe we can take the opportunity to kill him." But what about the golden core cultivators in the spirit-swallowing formation? Ruoling was a little weak, but she still asked, "It is very difficult to kill a nascent soul. Why don't we take the opportunity to kill the rest of the Dao sect disciples?" LV Ruochang said confidently, "I have a soul-killing formation outside the spirit-swallowing formation, even if there is a pregnant senior brother." As he spoke, a rumbling sound of thunder rang out from the sky above the sword catacomb. Within 100 miles of the sky, the rolling dark clouds surged rapidly, and faintly discernible golden threads danced in the dark clouds. A vast killing intent, through the power of imprisonment, filled the space between heaven and earth. Pu LV Ruochang sensed the killing intent of this heavenly thunder. How could he not know that this was the nemesis of spirit warriors? A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, and he was practically dispirited in midair. Junior sister LV Ruoling was shocked and hurriedly flew forward to support LV Ruochang. LV Ruochang's eyes were lifeless, like a dead fish. He stared straight at the sky and muttered, "In the sword catacomb where lightning does not occur, when will there be heavenly thunder? This cultivator who is pregnant in the sword catacomb, who is this expert? Alas, since LV Hushing was born, could it be that this is what she said? That I was too clever in my calculations, and in the end, I ruined Qingqing's life?" LV Ruochang was sad. Could it be that I can only fail at the last minute? This is predestined. -11.